Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this episode of Heresy Hammer. It is a very exciting episode because I've just come back from holiday. We wanted to do this kind of straight away after the event, but I was on holiday, so we have done it the day after I've got back. So I'm a little bit jet lagged, but we've got two wonderful people joining us today. So we've got myself, obviously, Rob. And maybe if Dan can take us to the next slide, that'd be great. Cheers, Dan. We've got myself, Rob, and we've also got Pardo from SN Battle Reports as well. And we've also got Dan from Ashes of the Imperium. So if you don't know these guys, we're going to introduce them for you right now. So let's start off with Pardo. So Pardo, you've been on the show before. I've been on your show, and I've come to many of your events as well. I've been on your back rows. But essentially, Pardo runs now an exclusively Horus Heresy YouTube channel, but you also do a number of events as well. So maybe if you could just give us a couple of minute kind of like brief overview of you yourself, what you are doing, the current state of the YouTube channel, and what you exclusively do on the YouTube channel at the moment. So just give us a rundown of SN Battle Reports.
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the founders of SN. We've been actually around this year was our 10th anniversary. So we've been around now for 10 years. Didn't start on YouTube, started on different social media platforms, specifically Facebook. We used to do classic style battle reports, which were 40k and Horus Heresy. Then we had a bit of a break of Heresy when 8th edition started, just too much work, and we had to make a decision of what game we actually had to focus on. Sadly, we made the wrong decision and focused on 40k, but we're back now to Horus Heresy, and we're liking it so much that now the channel is focused only on Horus Heresy. So we do battle reports, we do army reviews, we do a bit of everything Horus Heresy focused. And apart from that, obviously we've got our two events, one of them which we have just started a couple of weeks ago, which this is why we're here sitting now all together. So we also do the No Retreats Horus Heresy event, which is an application only event. I'm sure many of you have heard or seen before, and now we're doing our Gibraltar 30k Grand Tournament, which was an event we used to do only for 40k, and obviously with the switch of the channel going only Horus Heresy, we have switched it now to the 30k Grand Tournament.
Brilliant.
That's basically us.
Well, yeah, that's great. And you must have, I reckon, one of the largest collections of Horus Heresy armies in the world. Yeah, surely it's got to be one of the largest collections.
You always say that. I think that there might be bigger collections, but I don't think anybody has every single legion to the points we have painted wise. I'm quite sure we are the biggest painted collection of Horus Heresy out there. I'm sure we'll be back again.
Got to speak to Guinness World Records, I reckon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So as you said, we are talking about the grand tournament today, and I was joined. Going over to Gibraltar, joined by Dan from Ashes of the Imperium. Now, Dan is a very good friend of mine, and we got to know each other through the Horus Heresy, and ever since then, we got on like a house on fire, so much so we decided to go on holiday together to Gibraltar for the tournament. But Dan, why don't you just tell us your kind of a brief synopsis of yourself, and how you got into Warhammer, and because you run a podcast as well, maybe you could plug your own podcast, and then maybe talk about the Horus Heresy, what army you started for the Horus Heresy, and maybe the differences between the Horus Heresy and 40k. Maybe why you kind of like segued in, because I know you do lots of different kinds of games, but why is it that you've been playing the Horus Heresy over the past 12 months?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so I'm Dan, and I am, I suppose, probably a classic hobby butterfly. I do flip between systems, and I think I tend to have space for one system at a time. So when Age of Sigmar first dropped, I got massively into that, having previously been massively into 40k. And then after a couple of editions of that, went back to 40k. And I love 40k. I do a Warhammer 40k podcast, for goodness sake. But for me, the kind of classic rule set of kind of 7th edition and 7.5 and then kind of 7.5 Bravo, which I suppose we're on now with Heresy 2nd edition. For me, that captures the best bits about the game that I enjoy. For lore and background, 40k has my heart. It has so much so much depth to it, all the Xenos races and all, I suppose, all the character development that's happened since the Heresy. Absolutely, that is, I suppose, one of the reasons why we love Warhammer, right? It's sort of kind of all the depth to it. But gaming wise, I just feel like I prefer Heresy to 10th edition. There's a thriving, scene for both down here in Berkshire in the south of England. And yeah, I feel like Heresy 2.0, I suppose, kind of ticks those boxes for me. I still play 40k a little bit. It's very, very casually focused, very kind of narrative focus. Having been quite massively into like the Age of Sigmar competitive scene and kind of throwing myself into tournaments there, I kind of wanted a game where I can kind of exercise those like technical muscles, and then I want a game where I can exercise my like love for painting orcs or like trying silly elder schemes. So I get to do both with 40k and 30k. I suppose differences wise, I think, and I'll try not to start any controversy here, because there's one thing I know about the Heresy community is that they have strong opinions about 40k, right?
I personally think the difference right now is that one is specifically still a war game, whilst 40k isn't specifically a war game right now. Personally, just the look, aesthetic, and how the game plays, I think that's something that I always mention. I still believe that Heresy is still a war game, whilst 40k isn't specifically a war game. I don't know what I could call it, but I always like to comment with that.
So I'll counter that slightly, Pardo. It depends on your definition of a war game, right? And dictionary definition or personal definition, whatever it might be. I feel like 40k is a different style of war game, and it is a war game that caters to being able to do pickup games, to teach people off the street. And if you've got, like, take a Land Raider, for example, something that exists in both systems. You've got a cool tank. You're playing with you're a staff member. You're teaching an 11-year-old how to use his or her cool tank in a shop. You don't need to worry about armor facings. You don't need to worry about the sponson and can't see because it's behind a thing. You can just say, this tank has lots of guns. It can shoot all those guns. And so I think the 40k rule set there is a degree of simplicity right at the core foundational level, which doesn't appeal to war gamers like yourself who want that kind of deep technical thing. And if you want to push that all the way to the other end of the arc, you can go into something like Adeptus Titanicus, where you can like overload your reactors and put 2 spoons of sugar in your pilot's cup of tea to all that kind of stuff, right? And I think Games Workshop have built that system, that ecosystem of war games, so that they can cater to everything from mass Titan battles to skirmish, fantasy battles, and everything in between, right? And I think for me, as someone who loves a lot of those systems, it can be quite disheartening to see people effectively say things so negatively about one system, or more importantly, players of that system. You get a lot of people be like, oh yeah, 40k's for kids, and it's just like, well, you know, if you don't want that level of technicality, like I don't find the level of technicality in Adeptus Titanicus that attractive. Like, does that mean that I want like dumbed down games like 30k? And I think there's an argument for both sides. And I think for me, I get to enjoy both of them, right? I do a narrative podcast about 40k where it's all about like bringing the kind of the cool things that you see in the lore to life on a tabletop, rather than, because there's lots of content channels out there that will do, meta analysis and which gun you should take on a specific squad for that uber advantage. That's not where myself and Max, my co-host on the podcast, we just focus on, what cool book did we read and how do you bring that to life on the tabletop? And I think that's something that might appeal to the very narratively focused 30k player base, which is, hey, I've read this thing in Black Library, I've read this scene on Siege of Terror, I want to do a World Eater's Force that is representative of the kind of late heresy. They're red, they're corny, rather than the kind of warhoundsy, that end of the spectrum. And for me, that's what Warhammer's about. It's about bringing cool bits of the narrative and lore to life on the tabletop and having fun, right?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And in terms of your Age of Sigmar, you're massively into you're a squig man through and through, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
I see, like squig mad.
Yeah. There used to be, before they did the range refresh for Gloomspite Gits and released all these amazing plastic models, I had a bunch of the leftover from Fantasy and just ran like an all squig army. And it was in the days where everything. The Age of Sigmar was a bit of a wild west,
Okay.
and so yeah, it was wild. I even was on Warhammer TV playing with my squigs, and I think
Oh, really? Oh, that's pretty
squigs
cool.
something
That's
that
pretty cool.
speaks to a lot of people, So I think
Yeah,
that
yeah, they're
people
a
on the
lot of
chat
fun.
were
Yeah.
loving it.
Is that what you quite describe as a squigalanche or an avalanche squig based avalanche? I don't know. I've heard that phrase before. When I was looking at Gloomspite kits, I was like, these squigs, they look really fun. Like the models are so cool as well. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Age of Sigmar. But Dan, what is your main army at the moment? Like, what is it you are like? Because you've just literally started a new project this weekend. But what is the project you have been working on for the past 12 months?
So it's been my Alpha Legion.
Yeah.
I could flick forward a little bit and find
Sure.
a slide without some Alpha Legion on it. There we go. There's my Alpha Legion there. I think we're going to do a list analysis later down the slides. But yeah, I've been working on my Alpha Legion. That journey, I suppose I started my Heresy journey just over a year ago. So I've only really been playing for 12 months. And it started at the Rob's Kratos course. So I painted a couple of of those resin Mark IV Marines in a kind of metallic-y scheme because I really liked the metallic-y scheme originally. I didn't like working with Tamiya clears; they're quite difficult. And at that point, the metallic schemes had been very popular, and you see a lot of Alpha Legion armies in.
Yeah.
And going there to talking there about squigs, I do like being a special snowflake. I do like doing something slightly different. So I wanted something unique, and I can't remember the artist's name, but there's a guy that did a really heavily rusted, desaturated turquoisey teal Alpha Legion army in the kind of sort of, is it like Red Book phase of Heresy? I'm not sure you call it that.
Yeah.
And so I wanted a scheme that would kind of mimic that or kind of harken to that. And Rob, signed up to Rob's Kratos course, painted that Kratos that you see there on the screen, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I've expanded the army. I think I've probably got about 4,000 to 5,000 points now.
Yeah. It looks awesome, doesn't it? Like the matte Alpha Legion scheme just stands out so nicely on the set. Like when it's armies on parade, you're always like, "Oh, that's like super interesting." It's really good to see. Cool. Okay, well, let's talk about the tournament. So, Pardo, why don't you talk us through your rationale? I know that you obviously had done previously the 40k tournament.
Yeah.
And I think that just talking about tournaments in itself, I think within the sphere of the Horus Heresy, I mean, I've talked about it a lot before, and competitive play. Perhaps you want to talk through why you've done this event, and why, because before you must have thought there might be a bit of an appetite for it, right? And then perhaps that can lead us on to talking about just competitive heresy just in general, because there'll be lots of people watching this saying, you know what, this isn't for me because I'm just a competitive. I'm a non-competitive player. I play for the story. I've got lots of things to say on this, having gone to so many events over the past couple of years. But let's just get it from your point of view. Why did you want to do a 30k grand tournament?
So, we've actually spoken about this so much, haven't we, Rob? I think it's a very interesting subject to actually talk about, and I think it's a very interesting subject in the community itself. Yeah. So I wanted to bring something different. I wanted to not make tournaments something that is normal now in Heresy, but I wanted to give the option of people to have a tournament. Another thing, I think one of the biggest factors here is that our no retreat events are narrative and very narrative. They're I would say extremely narrative with cosplayers and video alerts and stuff like that. So we wanted something completely different. And apart from that, I think that it's something that we should have an option to. And I want to, and as we'll see from the list restrictions and how the event worked, I wanted it's to still be a tournament, but to cater for all sorts of people. As you guys saw, we actually did that at the event. There was people coming to compete. There was people that just were coming for fun and coming with the same list as they would take to a narrative event. Yeah. So something that I always say is I think that something that's very important is what is narrative. I think that is actually a more important question, a more difficult question to understand and to answer than what is a tournament. And depending with who you talk to, it's always a different answer. So I personally think that it's out there for everybody to give their own opinion on. So I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be a tournament. I wanted it to be same as what you normally get in any other game, where you are playing against the people that are winning and on the same points as you, and it doesn't matter what if you're a loyalist or if you're a traitor or if you're playing against the same army and legion as you're already playing. I wanted an overall champion at the very end. I tried to make it as less competitive as possible, in the sense of what I could do as a TO to make it as the least competitive as possible, making it, as we will talk, with rules packs, with using our house rules, making our own FAQ, list restrictions, unit restrictions, and at the same time, we will talk about it as well. Something that's very important is there was still a big element of player votes being in play as well. Understanding that you still have to be a gentleman on the table. Doesn't matter if it is a tournament or not. So it was probably 8-9 months of work to this point of having a FAQ, a rule set, and a missions pack, where we thought it was balanced as we could get. It will never be balanced. That's something that I want to push out. It will never be balanced, but we were trying our best to get it to a very balanced place. And I personally think that we did a good job for our first event. Obviously, from there, we will develop and make it even better, hopefully. And that's our aim. Just make it every time better and better.
Okay, that's really interesting, isn't it? The fact that, so basically you've tried to standardize the system. I mean, we'll talk about the engagement protocols in a bit, but essentially you've tried to standardize it in order that no list is uber powerful, right? I mean, that's essentially what you've tried to do. It is interesting, I think, because there'll be some people watching kind of going, well, tournaments aren't for me, but I always kind of get to this and come back to this point, which is that I often find that when I go to events, although the event might describe itself as narrative, it's often just a paragraph in the pack. And it isn't really alluded to within the event. The event itself might as well be either pickup games, or it might as well just be a tournament, because that's just the way it is, without a first, second, and third place. So it's interesting to see kind of like a formal tournament kind of like being put on. I mean, I went to one in October in High Wycombe, and that was interesting. Some of the lists were very, very, very strong. But then I look back at your event and that tournament as well in High Wycombe and go, then they were no stronger than some lists I've been to, or some events that I've been to in the past 18 months, right? So that is really, really interesting. I think that on the one hand, people go, well, I want a chill time at a narrative event, but the lists don't always kind of like always reflect that, which I think is interesting. I mean, Dan, you've been to a range of events over the past the past year, including like a Throne of Skulls event. I mean, if you compare it to like Throne of Skulls and tournaments like that, I suppose, what are your thoughts? But I find it funny that Horus Heresy players always kind of go, oh, I'm a narrative player or whatever, but actually really it's just the lists that we all take are just as strong as what you'd see at a tournament.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, I have some strong opinions on this, and maybe it's just because I'm a sensitive 40k player and I don't like people being mean about 40k players, because I'm one. So I find there is a sense in the 30 from my I can't speak for everyone's community and everyone's meta is different, but certainly from the UK, South UK, Midlands exposure to the heresy scene that I've seen, there is, I think, almost an allergic reaction to competitive or non-narrative, even to the point that I've been at heresy event before and referred to the judge or the lead organizer. I'm not going to use a word here because it's part of the story, but I referred to him as a TO, and he said, wash your mouth out. I'm not a TO. I'm an EO. This isn't a tournament, it's an event. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, whatever, tomatoes. It's all the same thing. You're the guy running it, like, here's my question. But he was adamant that this wasn't a tournament, it's an event. And I think, Pardo's there used, I suppose, like on two sides of the same coin. Is it competitive or is it narrative? Or is it tournament competitive or narrative and an event and a chilled out thing? It's like, I've been to tournaments and had a lovely time. And this is across all Games Workshop systems. I've been to tournaments and had amazing times and had amazing games with people, and I've been to chilled out narrative events and had rubbish games with people that have argued about rules. And I think across the spectrum of the games I've played, I think everyone takes the narrative of their armies seriously, but that doesn't mean they can't bring that narrative to a competitive event, and the event, the competitive event being that you win as an individual rather than your faction wins. And like you say, Rob, you and I have been to a couple of events together where we've been to a narrative event, and the EOs kind of put up a slide at the beginning of mission 2. They put up a slide and go, so the traitors have done some stuff to the moon base, yada yada yada. You all know that. Anyway, here are your tables. And they've literally they've dismissed their own narrative. And I don't know. It can be a funny one. I think you can definitely bring strong lists to an event, and you can bring narrative lists to an event, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. We'll talk a little about lists and our matchups down the line, but I played, for example, a Gavorback and Demon Summoning Word Bearers army. I played a Bike and Jet Bike and Speeder Heavy White Scars army. And I played a very logically bitty Ultramarines list that was able to pull my army apart piece by piece, which all those three things are very on theme and on narrative for the event. They were all had a varying degrees of strength, but they were all narrative. And this was Pardo's competitive tournament.
I think for me, I think there's probably kind of just to pick out a couple of bits from there. I mean, just to say, I thought the tournament that we went to, this tournament, and we'll talk about it more in our closing thoughts, was one of the most chilled events that I've actually ever been to.
Sure.
And although it was a tournament, because of the vibe of the event, in many ways, it seemed less high stakes than lots of narrative events that I've been to, which is just an interesting, just an interesting one. But let's talk about how you try to standardize it, because it wasn't a free for all in the sense that people could just bring whatever they wanted, because there were some quite strict rules around the list. And I suppose from my perspective, what you were trying to do was, by putting those quite strict rules in place, you were also trying to determine who was the best general. So it wasn't just down to that people brought an overpowered list and they won all their games. It was also, you were trying to work out who was tactically the top players in the room, I guess. So let's run through the restrictions, and then perhaps you can just chip in why you've done that on them. Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So it was 3,000 points. That's fine. You did it over 3 days, right? So the first game was on a Friday. 2 games on a Saturday and then 2 games on a Sunday. There were no allied detachments or optional detachments allowed, which was really an interesting one. Do you want to talk through that one with us?
Yeah. So I always thought that the allied detachments, as much as you can use it as a narrative point. Personally, when you're building a list to bring a strong list or bring a competitive list, I think that an allied detachments works very well to actually counter your what your list doesn't do well. So your the negative parts of your events, right, or of your list. You're not good at. You don't have any good long range shooting power. You bring some Soul Auxilia to have those vanquishers in the back. So I think that an allied detachment for an event like this actually works far too well, in the sense that you can always factor in what is missing from your list with a different option. So basically that was it. Something else apart from it is that from the 10 years we've been doing SN and the 10 years we've been running events, we have actually never allowed allied.
Okay.
So that's another thing that we've been pushing forward. And just to add something that you said just a couple of minutes ago.
Sure.
Personally, I always think that a tournament should be won by the best general and not the best army. And I think that's something that's very, very important in the tournament, and something that I really wanted to push for. I wanted someone to win it for being the best general and not for winning it because he was bringing the best army. This is why some armies or some legions have extra restrictions than others. Just because I think it's needed. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I mean, it's interesting you say about the allied detachment, because I mean, when I've seen the rise of Mechanicum is a really good one, actually, as a good illustration of what people, because if somebody said to you, I have a Mechanicum allied detachment, you can almost guarantee what they've got in that detachment, which is that they've got some Thalax filling the troops, then they've got some Myrmidons, and maybe some long range fire support in the form of Myrmidons or a Morax or a Talon of Morax, right? Or a Thanatar. You can almost be like, oh, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, right? And it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that just like that single faction is what you're aiming for. Now, this is one that caused quite a lot of interest from people, I think, which is that it was maximum of 5 line units in your army list. Now, there were some kind of caveats to that, and you could kind of like almost push the boundary on those 5. So, for example, you could take a command squad, and that wouldn't be included within your 5. You could take an Imperial Fist Castellan, which would give line to some heavy support options, and that wouldn't count as your 5 line. So do you want to talk us through why kind of you could max out at 5 line on that one, because that was probably one of the most interesting ones of the list?
Sure. So obviously we wanted to try something different, and we've already said we wanted to restrict as much as possible for that lists act more or less the same. So one of the things we wanted to push for was because of we had been playtesting this rules pack, at least, or this restrictions for lists, for about 3 months. We used it for a league here in the local scene. We looked for some playtesting, used it for some practice games, and we thought that on many occasions when we were playing a objective heavy game, we actually thought that some games were won before the game even started, just because you had triple the amount of line as your opponent. And we thought that restricting that to a certain point was good, in the sense that a game was never won before the game started. It doesn't matter what type of mission it was, especially if it's an objective grabbing mission. So we were actually going to be very, very strict, and we were actually going to do 5 line when deployed on the table. But we actually changed it about a month before we actually released the event pack and the list restriction pack, and we allowed things like equipment to work. Now, I can say already something that will be changing for the next event is that we will be very strict, in the sense that there will always only be allowed a maximum of 5 line units when you are deployed. So the things like banners will be in those 5
will
line.
count as one. Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the interesting...
No, my poor heralds. Rob, you
this is tragic, isn't it? One of the interesting things I would say, though, is by maxing out on 5 line, what I think it encouraged people to do was take up to a maximum of 5 line. So often in 3K lists, you'd see people bring like 3 or 4 line units just because they had to. But what I felt looking at the list when they dropped, I was surprised by the fact that people had maxed out on their 5 line and then tried to crowbar more in, clearly giving the sense that actually the line was gonna be very important. Of course, armies need to be fully paint and based, and there's strict WYSIWYG rule at the event as well, for obvious reasons. No fortifications, so I mean the only one that you would probably ever see in a tournament is the Aegis defense line, but that was out, and you had a rule around kind of 50% needs to be of your army needs to be Games Workshop models, i.e. not all printed, which is fine, right? Like this, that's fine. So some of the other rules, so this was another interesting one, and I think sometimes caused some confusion, particularly if you were, say, a Solar Auxilia player, but the rule of 3 was in effect, wasn't it? So this means that a maximum of 3 same units can be added to your army list. Dedicated Transport, Solar Auxilia, Demons of the Ruinstorm, Imperial Arts Militia are exempt from this. So essentially, you could have 3 Doredios, but you weren't allowed a 4th one, right? You could have 3 Laser Rapiers, but if you had 3 in a unit, you weren't allowed to have more than those 3. Do you want to just talk us through? So
basically, I think the easiest way to explain is that if any unit's minimum number is 1, you wouldn't be able to have more than 3 of any time. So if a unit starts on 2, that is fine. But if a unit starts on 1, your maximum is 1 per every unit. So like you've already stated, things like dreadnoughts, I think, is something different, because there's another restriction for dreadnoughts. But if you brought a squadron of Predator tanks, you would only be able to have 3 Predators.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, it's down to restricting as much as possible and capping as much as possible those really good units.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, a list restriction. And if there's something that's very good, you will only be capped to bring it to.
Yeah, I mean, it's to stop spam, isn't it? I mean, that's the bottom line. Yeah, it's to stop
That's
spam.
the bottom line.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say about Solar Auxilia, I mean, it didn't come up really, but like laser rapiers on Solar Auxilias are really interesting because they're just as good as marine ones. I think they're ones less in terms of toughness.
They still hit the same.
They still hit the same.
Ballistics.
Yeah, exactly that, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because then because they're not capped, you could potentially take an awful lot of heavy, of laser rapiers. I think, which is
it's definitely something that we're going to see in the future. The good thing is we've got so much data now from this event. We can see how things worked, and we'll definitely get a bit more restrictive with the likes of Solar Auxilia, Militia. Demons of the Runestorm, all the secondary from the legions themselves.
Cool. There was definitely a solar list that didn't turn up. The player dropped.
Yeah, a couple
which
of
I was like, wow. We dodged a bullet there because it was a real spicy list.
I would have loved to see how it would have done.
It would have been good to get that data, right?
Get that data, but obviously, and like I said, like next year. We could even be in a new edition if the rumors are true. So there could be so many more changes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got Iron Warriors and Siege Tyrants and Iron Havocs are capped at 0 to 1 units. So that makes sense. I don't think we need to kind of dwell on that. Mech are limited to 1 unit of either Myrmidon Sectors or Myrmidon Destructors. These unit may only add an additional 2 Myrmidons to a maximum unit size. Very sensible choice there, I feel. Mech players will be screaming though. Multiple Legion heavy sport squads are only allowed each weapon variant of 0 to 1. So you couldn't have 3 units of las cannons, say, right? It could be like heavy bolters, las cannons, Volkite. It was interesting. I felt that like the las cannons were there, autocannons were there, missile launchers I think were there, but I don't think anybody apart from myself took any heavy sport Volkite, which was really interesting.
There was very few. Yeah, there was very few.
Really interesting. But I mean, the las cannons were kind of a staple in many of the lists. Just as we know how effective they are. Demons of the Runestorm, so Sovereigns are capped at 0 to 2, absolutely fine. Like, yeah, they are very strong, so it makes sense. Iron Hand Grav Moritats are capped at 0 to 1. Yeah, I was on the receiving end of one of those, so 0 to 1 is absolutely fine.
It's crazy the amount of damage one can do. We've seen it, so yeah.
So it's the Haywire, isn't it? It's just so reliable.
It's the Haywire.
Yeah.
It's the Haywire. Yeah.
Phalanx Warders were limited to 0 to 2 units. I didn't see any. Well, I didn't play against any Phalanx Warders at the event. Which is interesting.
All the Imperial Fist players that came didn't bring Stone Gauntlet. So
interesting. True gentleman. Paragon.
I think the cap was good. I think that if you're going to bring a Stone Gauntlet, you need more than 2 units. So look, I think that basically worked.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Paragon Thanatar Calyx gain 5 up precision shot instead of the normal sniping rule. And then exemplary battles and legacy units are allowed. Yep, good choice on that one. So this was really interesting. Rights of war that don't allow opponents to gain their kill points, Sagia Mazan, will not be in play for kill points. It will still work for first strike, say the war, or break their ranks, and any other parts of the right of war that can still be used. And that's a good one, right? Because the Sagia Mazan is just so oppressive, and it would mean if you were drawn against it, you wouldn't have been able to score.
Yeah, it's a game you win before the game starts, right?
Exactly.
If it is a kill point mission.
Exactly right. So every player can play every turn, doesn't matter what legion or side you are playing on as a loyalist or traitor. So Dan, you faced against Alpha Legion, right? So yeah, you could be Alpha Legion. Yeah, as did I. Yeah, that's a good point. Every player can play. Oh, I did that one. Pairings as from game 2 will be done with points equal or as close as possible, and you're using the BCP app, which I've used before, and I quite like it. I really like the fact that the lists were accessible via the app. It just meant that while I was going to the loo, you could always have a look at your list for 5 or 10 minutes while you were just to kill some time, right? But it's good. Is it the first time you've used that app?
We always use it. I think it's fantastic. I think one of the strongest points is what you've just actually mentioned. I think it's great. We used to do pairings like normally an hour before, or if it was if there was a game the next day, we used to give the pairings the night before, so you could just lay in bed or talk about it with other friends whilst having a drink the night before. And I think it's great. Another thing that I think is really good is that if you are, sometimes it gets awkward to ask your opponent stuff constantly on the table. So I think it's great to have his list in front of you, so you know what upgrades he has, what stuff he has. So it's always good to have, and it helps the EOs and the TOs so much more, in the sense of it's pairing up for you. It's just a quick click away. So much work done for you, and it's great. Seriously, it is a very good way of using it.
Yeah, I really rate it, actually. I like it a lot. You must have used it a fair amount, Dan, before previously, right?
Yeah, BCP, and I think there was another one that's very similar. But I think it's great, as Pardo says, being able to access lists at the table. It's really useful because, especially if your opponent's deploying or whatever, it's just you'd be able to. Often it's like, oh, does that have an augury scanner? Does this have a that? Does this have that? And especially if, and I don't think I had any moments like this, but especially when you think, oh, wait a minute, does that unit have an augury scanner when you've just been reacted to? You can then just have a quick look at it and be like, it doesn't. And so then you can then ask that question and say, the list doesn't have an augury scanner, does it? Because, whatever. And if it does, which normally it does because people don't intentionally cheat, you don't have to then ask that question because they failed to mention it at the beginning of the game. And it removes like a potentially awkward kind of potentially combative reaction. And hey, listen, I don't like conflict. Like, I don't like asking awkward things like that of my opponent if I can avoid it. But equally, I don't want to mug myself off if I'm being reacted to for free against an augury scanner that isn't there, for example.
Exactly. 100%. Okay, cool. Well, all sensible restrictions. I think the ones that were clearly the most interesting was the 5-line units and the rule of 3. But I mean, we've gone through why that was, and actually I think that it made the list fairly, you know what, all the lists were fairly reasonable, and there were stronger lists there than others, but as a result of the careful planning, I think the lists were fairly okay. Let's have a look at the next slide, and I think it's going to be
I've clicked. There we go. Oh, it's a picture of us. How
cool. So, do you want to talk through the awards as well? Because we haven't mentioned that. And also, as spoiler alert, I won the event. Just to. Cool. So talk us through the prizes, because there were some hefty prizes available at the event as well.
Yeah. So, favorite overall army, basically armies on display. We voted as the SNT voted for the best armies we thought should be showcased to everybody at the event, and obviously this award was voted just by the attendees. We had a little code where you could just manually and digitally vote for the person you enjoy, the army you like the more. Obviously, again, Crystal Award, Element Games vouchers, which is one of our sponsors for a very, very long time. So some really nice vouchers there. Players Player Award, again, voted by the players themselves. Again, was actually quite important. I don't think people understood how important it was. So the ratio to become to basically come in the podium was obviously wins first. So if you had 5 wins, you would clearly win, which Rob did do. He did 5 wins. After that, there was both Dan and what was his name? Ziggy. Yeah, both were on 4 wins. But obviously it goes to game win points. So it goes wins points, which you could get 3 points or 2 points, depending on your mission point score. And then before we went on to mission score points, there was players player votes. So on this occasion, for example, we had Rob winning with 5 wins. Then Dan and Ziggy had the same amount of wins, so it went to mission win points. If it would have been a draw in mission points, which I think Ziggy just won one more at 3 points, Dan, it would have been Dan coming runner up because he had more player player votes than Ziggy. So it's quite important. We're even going to restrict it even more next time. It's going to go wins, players player votes, win points, and mission points. So it's actually going to get even more important. I think that it's very important to be a gentleman on the table. I've always been very, very passionate and very pushy towards that. I think having a nice game and is much more is nicer to have than obviously not having a shit game. So, and then we had the overall champion, runners up and 3rd place, which was from the overall event.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, we will come back to those best sporting a little bit later when we talk about mine and Dan's game, because that could have changed a number of things. So, yeah, okay. Well, so I think we're having a look at missions now, or at least just the missions. So we won't talk about kind of individual missions on our games just yet. But what I wanted to kind of draw on, and maybe we can talk about the secondaries. But you spent a long time playtesting these, didn't you? I mean, that was the that was the sense. So maybe you want to talk about just the playtesting that you did, and maybe the balance of missions as well, because there were quite a few scoring, but there were still kill points, and I've not played a kill point game for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So maybe just talk through the rationale of the missions.
Yeah, sure. So we started playtesting this beginning of November. We were playing about maybe a game a week, playtesting each mission as much as possible. And just what we would do is we would playtest the same mission on multiple tables. So there would be 6 of us going to the studio or to the club, and we would play the same mission between 6 of us. And then we would always sit down and say, like, what the advantages of the mission, the disadvantages, and if there was something that we could do to balance them out. Which was great. I think we did a very good job with what it was. Again, I think that's something that's very important that we haven't mentioned yet, is that for all our events, we actually do lists in before the mission packs come out.
Yeah.
So you can't build the lists for the missions themselves, which I think is something that's very important. I think when you see a mission pack, you can actually do much, much better if you build lists with the missions itself.
Yeah, because what you're forcing players to do is to build broad and balanced lists that could deal with any kind of thing, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're trying, isn't it?
Yeah. So if we published them and they were mostly all objective based, people would just spam on many units to actually either deny or capture. If if the missions are very killy, people would bring a lot of shooting power and just blow you. So not having that, like Rob says, it makes you have an all rounder, and I think it's something that a lot of the people were talking about in one of our groups on WhatsApp. It's like it's so much more difficult to build a list when you don't know the missions, and I think that's something that again comes down to the best general and pushes towards the best general as well. So again, a lot of playtesting, trying to make it as round and fluid as possible, where you were playing different deployments with different style missions, and making it easy at the same time. Something that I don't like from past experience is going to events where the missions are overcomplicated and everybody's playing them differently, and the TO's coming to the table and has to clear things out. So we try to make it as clear as possible, as fast as possible to play, and obviously as different for every single mission going along the 3 days that we did play.
Yes.
Secondaries.
It's interesting as well, actually, like, because sometimes a simple mission is exciting enough when you have 2 people playing each other trying to win. Like, and one of the things I feel that narrative events try too hard to do is to overcomplicate missions by
100%.
adding more and more layers of things on. On turn 1 there's an orbital strike, on turn 2
spaceships.
Literally that, and it becomes so that often these things get forgotten. Like you remember rules as many as you forget the rules when you play quite complicated missions, and I appreciated the fact that they were actually just fairly straightforward.
We cleared it out as well. Like even if you go to the missions themselves in the books, there's so much more text that there should be. So we try to clear it out as much as possible for it was streamlined as possible. And something I wanted to mention before, something that I think is quite interesting to actually talk about as well, is that people, when you go to an event, a tournament like this that you went, by the second, third game, you're actually playing people with the same sort of list balance, which doesn't happen in narrative play. In narrative play, it could be your 4th game, and you're still matching up against things that are going to blow off the table just because it's narrative. This way, especially with the help of BCP, which they are matching you up with the same win rate and points rates, you actually become, after the second, third game, you're normally playing the same level of lists for the remainder of the tournament.
That is a really good point, actually. And as controversial as it might sound, I actually like Swiss even at an event like a pickup games or for narrative events, because the problem you have where everyone lines up and gets a raffle ticket or matches up with people is that the matches can be so wildly skewed that it means that one of you or both of you are not going to have a balanced game. By the time it gets to the third game, the lists are so balanced out that actually you're more likely to have a better time because you know that the lists are balanced out. Which is why I quite like Swiss. You don't want to. Yeah, you could have 4 terrible games because they're just every single one of those matchups have just been really, really, really.
And
poor
people have driven multiple hours. They've spent money on hotels, and they've got they've convinced their partner that they're going to spend the weekend playing Warhammer rather than helping her out in the garden that weekend or whatever it is that's going to get done.
Yeah, true.
And to then play 4 games and get absolutely smashed because you happen to have been done against 4 people that have taken stronger lists, however many degrees stronger. It's a bit of a feel bad, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. The other one I wanted to say was about terrain, actually. So one of the things I would say about this event. So number one, the terrain was amazing. That was, in fact, the best terrain I think I've seen at an event. But it wasn't like 40k where the terrain was standardized, was it? It was actually every board was unique and different, and that offered its own challenge in and of itself because it meant that perhaps if you had a big gun line, you were playing on Prospero or a pyramid themed board, and there was so much line of sight blocking on there, it actually put you at a disadvantage, which is interesting. I think that one
again, best commander is the one that would win the game. So again, it's pushing again for best commander, not the best army to win again. So it was a mixed match from all tables. So it basically was luck of the draw to what table you would play, and we tried to portray that in every single table being slightly different. Say it's density to a less density to woods in the next table, and so often. Shall we go for the secondaries?
Please, go for it.
Yeah, so we standardized the secondaries, again, something to just make it easy and streamlined, so every mission has the same secondaries. We went for Slay the Warlord as a normal kill point for Slay the Warlord, and then we went for Last Man Standing, which basically, again, you've seen it many times. Whoever has most remaining units at the end of the game receives 1 victory point. We went for Counter Strike, though, which is something that you don't normally. If you are a Zone Mortalis enthusiast and you play a lot, Counter Strike is actually a secondary mission there, and we thought it was great. I think it's something. What we think is so for First Strike or whatever it's called now, Break Their Lines. It's a huge swing for that secondary to be in play, especially with the likes of Raven Guard or Alpha Legion, Rites of War, where you kill a warlord. Suddenly you're killing something first. Something that is a HQ, another point for, and then you're suddenly getting the 3 points for your Rite of War, and suddenly it's a 5-point swing from the first shot of the game. It is far too much. So we didn't like that. Again, this was from playtesting. We actually scrapped that because of that, because there was some Rite of War that were just far too good for that specific secondary, and we changed it up to Counter Strike, as we will go later on with how first. What's it called? Whoever started, what's it called? Strategic advantage. We actually changed strategic advantage as well. It counted well with strategic advantage in the sense that whoever went second, apart from not going first, would be nice enough to try and get a point if you actually went quite defensive with your deployment.
And also just a couple of things just to pull out there. So the person, me and Dan have often talked about the person with a strategic advantage, and when we played in the league locally, if you had strategic advantage, it was essentially a foregone conclusion that you would win. And what you guys did was actually, and this is an SN house rule, is that the person going second actually got to choose their deployment zone. And I went second, I think, more often than not at the tournament, and that was massive for me. Being able to choose that deployment zone just gave me a security blanket, a measure of security that I just felt, he's going to go, this person's probably going to go first, so actually I'll take the side with more line of sight blocking just to protect me, which I think is really interesting. And the other thing to say is that Counter-Strike, because I went second more often than not, actually, it's particularly with those low scoring missions, made a massive difference to me. So if I'm thinking about Ziggy's game that I had with him, that Counter-Strike, I think, came up and was very, very important in those low scoring games, and it made the difference between winning and losing.
For me, definitely. The Counter-Strike secondary was, as I was going into turn one, it was I was playing turn one of how do I deny Counter-Strike to someone, because I think it's such an important point. And I think a couple of my games were won or lost on having an extra point, or certainly maybe in fact maybe it was our it was our practice game and our actual game, right? It was just it was in the Counter-Strike.
It was literally it was in that because I mean we'll talk about this in a bit, but essentially Dan lost our practice game because of the Ultramarines unique reaction, which is I could fire back twice with fire back with an alternative unit, which I think gave me Counter-Strike. And then Dan had learned from that in our second in the final, and as a result of that, you have to think very, very carefully. So it might often meant that you went for a squishier unit that you might not go for that couldn't return fire, right? Because just to shut down that Counter-Strike point. Yeah. Again, that's all tactical, isn't it? That's thinking through actually, trying to get as many VPs as possible. Yeah,
we wanted every single secondary to be a tactical point, right? We didn't want it to be an easy point, like kill something first turn. That's a easy point. So all three were actually counter to that. Again, I think that a strategic advantage right now is far too powerful. Go first, choose now fighting and choose your deployments. We're going second now. We've briefly spoken about every board being different. That meant that being second and being defensive not only made sense narratively as well, because the defender will obviously be defending where he wants to defend, whilst the attacker is attacking whenever he wants. And if he wants to attack at night, that's basically it. So we do basically get that counter. And again, back to best commander. Obviously, before the game even starts, you're already thinking about which side you want to deploy on to defend at a better place. So,
100%. Awesome. Okay, well, let's have a look at the next slide, because I think this just talks about our general experience. Yeah, so I think, Dan, why don't you talk us through kind of just maybe the before bit. So the way that we had gone about and planned it, and kind of listeners at home probably, if they're thinking about coming next year to the tournament, and spoiler alert, there is a second one coming. How could ours be like a map of how they did it? What we would recommend, where we would stay, because it's fair. And then I think at the end, what I'll do is I'll maybe compare it with no retreat and why it was a little bit different. So so talk us through, what our experiences was almost before the tournament.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, the tournament was on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There were 2 games on Saturday and Sunday, and 1 game on the Friday, right? And I think that extra, that extra game, because most Heresy events tend to be 4 games, that extra match gave, I think, a better seeding for the results, which absolutely would make sense in a competitive environment. So the game on the Friday actually started really, really late. And for me, who was already there by Friday, I was like, oh, this is a bit annoying having to hang around. But actually, it did mean that people flying from all over the world, Ziggy, who came second, flew from Canada, for goodness sake. I'm not sure he turned up on Friday morning, but he could have done, right?
Yeah.
It just means that if you're in, a neighboring European country, you can just hop on a plane on Friday morning and arrive early afternoon and get signed up and then go straight into the event. I personally think it's slightly better I think I would arrive, if I was just going for the event, I would arrive on the Thursday.
Yeah.
But that's me. I like to, take things easy. I'm conscious that's an extra night in a hotel. That's maybe Thursday flights that were more expensive than the Friday mornings, whatever it might be. Maybe you don't live close enough to a hotel, to an airport to get there on a Friday morning for an early flight. So all these things kind of come into play. So if I was going next year and just going to the event itself, I would turn up on Thursday evening at some point, and then just there were people playing pickup games, practice games, and just catching up with everyone. Everyone was super friendly. That was cool. In terms of accommodation, we stayed in it's not an Airbnb. It was a Verbo, which is Airbnb adjacent, right? We stayed in a little apartment. It could have accommodated, I think, 3. With a pull-out sofa bed. We were desperately trying to get some other friends to come to Gibraltar with us. And I will touch on that actually. But there's definitely, if you know people, then share an Airbnb or just get a standard hotel. I would say I think Gibraltar accommodation is quite pricey, so I would book as early as possible.
Yeah, so hotels are pricey. Yeah, I think that there's a really good gap. I think that Airbnb is for sure the better way if you want to save some money, definitely.
And if you don't know people going, then for a few quid a month, you can join SN's Patreon and have access to the WhatsApp chat, and
Which
jump
it
in
did
there
happen,
and say,
right? It did happen, yeah.
Literally
right?
It did happen.
I want to share, who's up for it, and everyone's super friendly. I will say on cost, one of the things that when we were talking to our local group of we're going to Gibraltar, you guys, someone should come. I think we're talking to our friend Tom. And one of the things that people came back with was, that sounds expensive. But actually, if you were to drive to Nottingham, on your own and pay for the fuel cost for that, stay in a hotel on Friday night and Saturday night and pay for that on your own, for example, a ticket cost from GW for one of their kind of Throne of Skulls, I think, is like 60 quid, 75 quid or whatever.
Yeah, 70 quid. Yeah.
Like, it's not actually the only thing I think that costed more, like significantly more, was just, I think, the flight. But then even that was, because we booked it early enough, it was 125 quid rather than say 30 quid of petrol or whatever.
Yeah. If you compare like train prices as well, I think someone on the SN community was actually saying their train ride was like 90 quid or something like that, something crazy like that, which is like, it's like that's like plane ticket prices.
Exactly. So I don't think it's so. The point there is, by the time you're sharing accommodation and being set, especially if you are sharing an Airbnb and they do have a full kitchen facility, and you're sharing with 2 or 3 other people, then you don't have to go out and eat every night at a restaurant, and you can split your accommodation 4 ways, and you buy a budget fare for the airport. It's actually relatively affordable. I'm conscious that it is still, I suppose, more expensive than going to your local scout hut and playing at a 12-person event with your mates. Right? Yeah. Fine. Rob and I did, however, go out slightly earlier because we recorded a couple of bat reps with Pardo. It's very, very graciously invited us out there, and that was good fun. I know Rob's been on the channel before. This was my first ever bat rep. It was really good fun. I think it certainly helped me practice my list. I don't think I'd played a game with that list. So I played a practice game with Rob and a practice game on stream on YouTube rather with Pardo. And it helped me. It helped me learn a couple of things because we both played games from the mission deck, and it also helped me work out a couple of things about my army. I think that pretty much covers it. Apart from, I suppose, the most important thing on this slide is the food. The food there.
I'm so hungry. It's been there.
I've already had dinner. I'm just looking at thinking
the metric with which all holidays and heresy events should be judged by. We had some great food actually, didn't we?
The food's great. The food's great over here. That's for sure.
I think one of the things I would say is that it was a different experience to No Retreat, because the No Retreat is obviously very curated by the SN team, and they organize meals for you. If you're staying on the Sunborn, you would typically have breakfast in the Sunborn, and then because of the timings and because of the location, you're more often than not really eating in the places around the Sunborn, which is Ocean Village, which is where it's located. Is it the Old Town that we stayed in, Pardo? Is that what it's called?
It's Old Town. Yeah. Old Town.
So what that did was actually throw us right into the thick of Gibraltar, and because it forced us to fend for ourselves, we were able to go to very exciting eateries and lots of places that were very good value for money. If I think about the wraps that we had, which was probably under £10, which was very, very filling at lunchtime, you could just eat that, right, and then you would be set. And I think that it was a different experience because we had much more freedom to be able to kind of go and eat in lots of different places. I did just want to say on cost, so and I think this is really important, going back to what you were saying. So I have been to heresy events where I stayed on a Friday and Saturday night at Premier Inn, so that's where I typically stay, and have paid 140, 150 pound a night. Whereas it cost us for what, like 6 nights, maybe 5 nights, 6 nights. It cost us £320 each to stay at that Airbnb. So I think the point that Dan makes, which is that what sounds like an expensive trip, I think if you compare it to say 1 or 2 Horus Heresy events that you might attend in the UK, I think that you would probably be surprised how cheap that you could actually probably get it. So don't let cost kind of like worry you, and if it is something that worries you, ask around, have a look before you go. Don't just write it off as something that you can't afford, because I think there's always ways that you can go about doing things.
Yeah, definitely. We're more than happy to help as well. So we're open to like emailing us, and we're constantly sending emails out if you need any help at all, looking for a good location or knowing about the location. We are more than happy to help.
Yeah, it's amazing.
One last thing
go for it.
On that is that I know someone came out, I think, with their family. One of the Blood Angels players, I think, was there with
James Owens. Yeah, James Owens.
With his wife and son. I'm not 100% certain whether Gibraltar has like all the excitement to keep people occupied for like a week. So, and James, I think, flew out on, I want to say like the Wednesday or Thursday.
Wednesday, yeah.
You know, Gibraltar is a small place, so if you are using this as an excuse to, you could attend an event but also invite your family. Just make sure you've got enough to occupy everyone. And actually, by the time Rob and I finished the games, we were getting back relatively late for dinner.
Yeah.
So, as I say, if you are kind of thinking, oh, it's cool, I'll bring my family along, you won't necessarily escape till relatively late, and there is not a huge amount to do if you're not into like historical stuff. Would you say that's fair, Pardo?
Yeah, I think Gibraltar is perfect for like 3 nights.
Yeah,
I think that's, you get it. Obviously the good thing is that Spain is just like minutes away, so there's always like the obviously escaping to Spain, escaping to Morocco, which is an hour a boat ride away, so there is more things to do. But I think I really agree with yourself. I think like 3 days with the family is good enough. You can go up to one of the days see the beaches, one of the days see the Upper Rock and see a lot of the heritage and history stuff. So I think if you base it like on around 3 days, you'll have enough. I wouldn't come to Gibraltar for a week, for example, with the family.
I think that's fair.
And also the other thing to say is that if your army is of a reasonable standard, the other thing you can do is go a little bit early. And Pardo, I'm sure, would be very keen to get a bat rep with you as well. So that's always a nice thing to do. And the studio, I mean, Dan and I played in the studio. We went and hung out in the studio for a couple of days. It's just a cool place to hang out, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing about the studio. Like, it's just a really cool place to chill and hang. And in fact, you were doing hobby right up until the last minute, weren't you, Dan? In that studio.
Some of the shots that Pardo took of my army for the pre-game shots, like a lot of the stuff, like even some of the bits there aren't painted, and I was literally painting it. I think on the morning I was like, "Oh, I've missed an eye lens here."
Minutes before,
wet on the table,
but it was ready. It was.
It was.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's just our general experience. So if you've got any more questions about that, just pop them in the comments below. I'm sure me and Dan can get back to you. So let's talk about our list now. We have gone through mine in kind of previous episodes, but we haven't gone through yours, Dan. So maybe you can talk through the list, why you created your list this way, and whether you think your list was broad and balanced, I suppose is something that I'd be keen to know.
So, this list, there was a rule of 3 in the pack, and I took that personally. So I took 3 squads of 3 land speeders and 3 contemptors and 3 recon squads. So I think this list is the result of 12 months of honing. I have only been playing Alpha Legion, apart from a 2,000 point Solar Auxilia event that we did for a weekend, where I just took all the tanks. This list is, I think, at its peak. I think there is one aspect of it that I would change, but apart from that, I would happily take this event. And I wish I had taken this army to Throne of Skulls, which I went to a few weeks before. As it was, two of the recon squads have got 3D printed bits. The three javelins and the three Kaisargans, the White Sky Speeders, hadn't been painted. So by the time the Throne of Skulls came round, it wasn't ready. The apothecaries weren't ready. Oh, and there was 20 whole tank marines which weren't painted as well. So the list I took to Throne of Skulls was completely different. Running through the list, it has in HQs you've got two heralds in there. One's on the right, that's a Terminator. He's in Cataphracti armor, and one in Artificer armor. And then you've got two apothecaries and two 20-man tack squads with no upgrades, no Artificer, no flags or scanners or anything like that. Three 5-man recon squads with Nemesis rifles. They do have an augury scanner, naturally. Then going to fast attack, you've got 3 units of 3 speeders. You've got a squad of Proteus speeders with double grav. Rob's already talked about how good those are plenty of times on the show before. 3 javelins in what I think is the classic loadout of javelins and las cannons and multi-melters, and then 3 Kaisargan land speeders as my rewards of treachery thing. 3 Contemptus dreadnoughts, 2 with 2 melters and 1 with a melter and a fist, and the fist has a grav in it rather than a melter. And then my favorite, my baby. There will be a day when the courage of Dan fails and he does not take a Kratos in his list, but today is not that day. No. Yeah, my favorite model. It was my gateway into Heresy, and it looks cool. It's an imposing thing. This is, I think, going into like what I would change. This is probably the inefficiency in the list. It does have a flare shield, it does have a Jacurian, so not only is it hard to kill, but when people shoot at it, it shoots back, which means people are less likely to shoot it, so it is then like doubling down on the survivability. But I think this is the thing that I would change. I think, Rob, we've discussed putting a conversion beam of Predator in there, and then I can't remember what we added in instead. Oh, that's right, yeah, I think conversion beam Predator and maybe like 8 Volkite heavy weapon dudes with a Master of Signals. Yeah, I think that fits in almost perfectly into the Kratos shaped hole, that removing it. But that would also then leave a Kratos shaped hole in my heart, and I'm not sure whether I'm ready for that. The list overall, is it broad? I think it's very good against killing certain types of things, and those certain types of things are very popular in events. Just looking at this picture here, you can see a Kratos, 2 Sakarans, 3 Land Raiders, or 2 Land Raiders, Contemptors and some Predators. Like, it's very good at killing Marines. It's very good, and it's especially good at killing elite Marines. What it's not good at is Mechanicum, Demons, and Solar Auxilia. And I mean demons as in like a horde of demons rather than like a summoned 5-man brute squad. So I was very lucky with my matchups. We're going to go into the missions and the matchups later, but I was lucky with my matchups. I didn't face any of the things that I thought that it would be incapable of dealing with. Rob and I did some list analysis, and we kind of looked at them in thirds, really. We looked at, there were the top third were a series of lists that we thought, I really hope I don't face that. But we were like, well, by the time, if we get to game 4 and 5 on wins, then we're going to end up facing one of these lists. And we both did. It was the White Skull list and the Iron Hands list. We both faced in game 4. Yeah. And those were up there in the kind of what we, I think, described as the nightmare lists. And then there was another third, which was, this is a good list. Like, it would do okay, but I fancy my chances against it. And there was another bunch of lists, which was, yeah, I'm cool. I'm happy with that. That shouldn't give my army a problem. So that's the list. It performed very well, and I think the most important thing, despite making a joke about God, I haven't played this list, and we did 2 practice games and that was that, what I have done is I have played purely Alpha Legion for a year, and every single Alpha Legion army that I've taken has had at least two, if not 3 or 4 Contemptors in it, at least 2, if not 3 recon squads in it, the speeders and the Kratos, and a heralded unit of some type. So I'd say about 2,000 points of that have been consistent for the past 12 months worth of events, and I think I've been
so you know how to you know those units backwards, right?
Absolutely. And that is, for me, knowing your army is I don't want to get all Sun Tzu on you, but like if you don't know your army well, there's
So
no point in
important.
playing.
Yeah, you won't
Yeah.
win. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
It's more about not making mistakes, is it?
No,
It's about not making the mistakes, and that's what playing an army so many times actually not makes you do. So
yeah.
And I think so many times, especially with reactions, that I think I would say I can be quite a meticulous player, and for me, it's all about the details. It's all about the half inch of range there or the positioning there. And Rob, you played two games against me this weekend, that weekend. So
very meticulous, very frustrating, and very meticulous. Yeah, because what Dan does is basically with a good example would be with the Contemptor. He will often put it at 22.5 inches away, or a mill out. That means that you can't return fire, but he can fire at you, and he's always careful about where he places them, which means that it's actually particularly if you've got an additional shooting reaction, it's then quite hard to engage at the 24-inch range, especially at night time, which you can't fire beyond that 24. So it is meticulous, but like playing Alpha Legion, it can be incredibly frustrating just by the nature of just Alpha Legion, right? So and you tended to always go for the second. You tend to go for the second shooting reaction, don't you? That tends to be the one that you.
It's a very shooty army. I think doing anything else is a waste of time with this specific list. I also haven't taken a Rite of War, and that's another thing of. Actually, if I were to drop the Kratos and not replace it with a Predator and replace it with maybe a fourth Contemptor with double C-beams, then I wouldn't have a tank in it, and then I could take the Headhunter Leviathan.
Yes.
The Shrouded would be irrelevant for the... it wouldn't be irrelevant for... I was going to say it would be irrelevant for attack squads because they've got Heralds in them.
Yeah, but if you didn't have the Heralds...
But it would then mean that I could maybe start turn one with my Herald in... the Volkite squad, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, okay, cool. A very good list. And I mean, Pardo called it out as a really, really good list when he was doing the list analysis with me as well. So, and that it performed really well.
Talk about pressure. I listened to that show, and Pardo was like, "Yeah, I think this list is going to be top third or top 10." You said
top 10, yeah,
top 10. I was like,
I was right.
Pressure's on me.
I was right. Yeah, I was right.
Okay, well, let's quickly just hop off into mine. So I have done this list a couple of times now, just to draw on a couple of things that people have asked about. So I didn't take a Rite of War. I took two Heralds, one with a jump pack that went with a Locutaris and one with an 18-man Despoiler squad. I had seven line in there. I think Dan, you were the same because of the additional Heralds. And that served me. Maybe it was six line, but all those 6 lines served me really well. And there were moments where I did take my heralds off to do their own thing at important moments in a couple of games. Some of the standout units included the Leviathan. Leviathan was the Storm Cannon one. I think always surprises people. Just the fact that it's got Sunder and the Rending 5-up is massively useful against AV14. But one of the things I think threw a lot of people were the conversion beamers, both on the Contemptors and on the Predators. I took the most amount of conversion beamers out of everybody, and they managed to, in every game, pull their weight and do what they needed to do. And if you didn't know what they were capable of doing, I think that it often caught people out. And I think by the end of the game, most people were like, I'll be adding one of those Contemptors to my list by the end of the game. So those did really well. And then the Volkite squad was again massively useful with the Master of Signals. That even just 8 men is really good, and I think I was the only person to take that 8-man Volkite squad. Massively useful just for taking down a number of units. Where people knew what Volkite squads did, that's when I had problems, because people were just like, that thing has to go straight away. And when I played Tom, he was very exacting about the way in which he wanted to get rid of them. And when I played Ziki, he wanted to get rid of it as well. And that was, I think, one of the first things that he killed. And just another point on the heavy bolters. So I had multiple heavy bolters, but Gravis heavy bolters on the rapiers. Again, they came in massively useful, particularly when kind of like killing Thalax. The fact that they're AP4 is just massively useful. So the list as you shall see, performed really, really well. But there were some standout units, particularly the Leviathans and the Sea Beam Pred and the Sea Beam Dreadnought as well. So that's my list. I won't go into much more detail than that one. But let's just talk about lists. I think that's what we're just going to do now. So Pardo on his shows, if you want to go through and see the 3K lists, you guys can have a look at those if you want to. But I think that, as Dan said, we kind of had put them into threes, which is lists that are very, very strong, mid-tier lists, and then weaker lists. I think some of the lists that that stand out to me that were strong were the Raven Guard lists, because I think both of those Raven Guard lists had 10 deliverers in them. Very, very frightening, battle-hardened deliverers. So those were ones that I did not want to face. Lists that had a number of Demon Brutes. So the White Scars list, for example, had 2 squads of Demon Brutes. Dan ended up facing that list. That was one that I definitely didn't want to face, because that was a very, very, very strong list just by the fact that it had those brutes in. There were a couple of custodian guard lists, particularly the one with 3 Achilles dreadnoughts in, that I was just like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do much against this. It was interesting though, because I felt the custodies list that were both lists were quite strong, almost got caught and tangled with demons quite early on, which I think prevented them from shooting up the table very quickly, because they were tangling in the first 2 games with demons, it was either draws or it wasn't major wins.
I think they lost against the demons, right? Both times.
Yeah, so I think that as a result, because of those early matchups, we managed to avoid some of the lists that we didn't necessarily want to face. Pardo, how about, was there any lists that kind of going in, but also on the day you were kind of like, oh, that those are strong?
So I think when we did my live stream, I think we went through most of them. I think that most of the ones that we did say were very strong actually delivered and were in the top 10. I think I was a bit underwhelmed with the demons lists, with the 2 sovereigns, all the infantry, I think it just came down to that. I think that sometimes you're going to go into a bad matchup, and there's nothing you can do. Dan was saying that he had some really good matchups, and he actually luckily missed some bad matchups. And I seriously think that it comes down to that. But I think that that Demons army with the correct matchups would have actually been on the podium. But I think obviously he must have hit some counters, and he actually, I don't know what he finished, but obviously he was in the top 3.
You've got to be lucky to win the tournament, I think. Not only do you have to be a good general, as discussed, you've also got to bring a bit of good list, but you've also got luck. And I don't just mean like your dice have got to be good. Sometimes you can win an event with bad dice, right, Rob?
Yes. Yes.
But you've also, that luck, that kind of one of the players played a demon list, and I think right at the end of the game, there was 1 demonette left at the end of turn 5. And because that player hadn't beaten that demonette, they got a minor victory instead of a major victory or a draw or whatever, which meant that they didn't podium. I think that's right. I think they drew rather than got a minor victory or something like that. And basically, had that player killed 1 more demonette, they would have come 3rd instead of me. And there were so many of my games. I honestly felt for my opponents games 3 and 4 really, because I didn't feel like I had deserved to win them, and so much was on like, can you roll a re-rollable 3 up? Turns out you can't. Oh, can you roll a 10 up, a below 10 leadership test? Oh no, turns out you can't. And there were so many moments like that in the games, and that's you can't account for that. You can't maths hammer that.
No.
And that's just the luck that comes into play.
Yeah, exactly. And matchups the same. I really remember going to Warhammer World for 40k event. I took NIDS at a moment where Space Marines were at their prime, and I knew that going into that event, Marines would just smash me. Playtesting against them before the event, Marines were just smashing me, and I ended up 5th at that event. I think there was like 80 people, and I missed. There must have been maybe 30 Marine players.
I missed them. Iron Hands were crazy.
Iron Hands and Imperial Fists, and I missed them. I played 5 games, and I didn't match up against the Marine player. It was bonkers. I was like, so obviously there is an element of pairings and an element of dice. It's like it's an overall thing. It's a big thing, and that's what I like about the hobby. I think.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
this is why, like, playing Warhammer and just enjoying it and taking the armies you want is so important. Like, so many times you see on like Reddit or whatever it might be of like, I've just started X army, what should I take, or what's a good list, or people, looking at what's won the LVO, or like paying people on a Patreon to teach them how to like break the meta and be good. It's like just enjoy it. Like, just
Yeah.
enjoy, like,
Yeah.
Definitely.
because you can't account for the matchups, can you?
No, that's a really good point. And I'll just draw two things out of what you guys said. So the first one, and going back to the beginning as well, was that lists at this event were no different to lists that I've been to at narrative events.
Fully agree.
Like, yeah, I understand that they were some of them were probably more optimized than perhaps lists that you see at an event, big due to the fact that they probably had more scoring in. But I've been to narrative events where lists have been stronger or on par. So that's something to say first of all. And actually, I think that's testament to the army composition that you did, Pardo. I mean, you weren't facing Horus Manus within a list, right? Because there were no special characters, So, and I think that by virtue of the fact that you were limiting certain units, I think that it kind of like standardized things, as we said. The other thing I would say, you're absolutely right that sometimes it just is luck of the draw. So I faced Imperial Fist twice, and both of those armies I play personally and know back to front. I played Alpha Legion twice. Both of those armies I played personally, and I played them back to front. And I played against Iron Hands, which my friend James plays. And I know, as a result, I know that army back to front. And it was coming off the back of, I mean, that Iron Hands list, we'll talk about that in a bit. But it was a Brethren of Iron list, so it had lots of automata in. That was coming off the back of an 8-season Patreon season that we had done about Mechanicum, so I knew what could react and what couldn't react, what was able to double tap, what the armor value were. I knew those mech automata models and their rules really, really well. If I had faced demons, I would not have known that. I could not tell you the stats for a sovereign, and I cannot tell you like what his weapon skill is, and I cannot tell you what his initiative is. Like, so there are things. I got good matchups, and I think that's the point that you guys are saying, which is sometimes it is literally luck of the draw in terms of where BCP kind of lands you on that on the first rung, and then from there where you get. I
think that the cognitive burden that facing an unknown army, it shouldn't be underestimated.
No, my gosh, yeah.
Like, not only you having to ask your opponent constantly, it's the decisions, it's the target priority, it's the mental stress of having to think about things, or even the time spent looking up rules on your phone.
Literally
that's time you're not spending making good decisions or worrying and deciding on things.
Because I think, with, as you said before, I mean, and as we've said lots before, because Horus Heresy is predominantly a shooting edition, or this is a shooting edition. Target priority, or your games are won and lost on target priority, and knowing what can effectively shoot things, right? That's why I build in, heavy bolters, which aren't the most optimized or would be considered most optimized, but I know that they're great at killing certain things. Target priority is so important for this edition. Your game. I went second in most of my games, but I knew which things to shoot at and when to shoot them. And I think that will stand you in good stead. Cool. Okay, right. We have spoken for a lot, so let's take a break here, and then we shall come back and talk about our individual games. Welcome back, everybody, to this second part of this bumper episode of Heresy Hammer, where I am joined by Dan and Pardo from SM Battle Reports. So in the first half, we just went through kind of the rationale behind the event. We talked a little bit about tournaments, why Pardo put it on, some of the restrictions, and we talked about mine and Dan's experience up to the event. And now we're going to talk about the actual event. So it started on Friday afternoon, I think around like 5:30, right? So we
Yeah.
kind of had a day just sort of like pootering around. We grabbed lunch and then headed over a couple of hours early. So registration was from 11 o'clock, wasn't it, Pardo? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Registration was at 11. Like Dan said, it's something we do so that people can basically travel on the Friday,
Yeah.
and obviously have one less day of hotel or stay, basically.
Yeah, and it was interesting because people didn't, in the main, people didn't, apart from the guys from Gibraltar, they didn't arrive at the last second. They kind of, like myself and Dan, we kind of arrived from like 2 o'clock and just kind of like pooted around, spoke to people, got ourselves ready, got drinks, whatever. But you could, of course, arrive at 11 o'clock and try and get a game in, a practice game. Particularly, I mean, I found our game, Dan, and our game Pardo as well, it was actually useful pre-playing those games, and I played the game with Kron as well. It was actually useful playing those games in advance, knowing what I needed to do in each one. So if you did want to get a couple of games in or a game in, then that is possible for the
Yeah,
Friday.
exactly. The bar's open. We've got food as well, so people were having lunch and stuff there as well. So it's a good way to chill.
Yeah,
I
cool.
will say that the venue, as you can see in this picture, it's really cool. It's really
amazing.
Nice.
It's really nice. Yeah.
It's a gorgeous internal building. Nice high ceilings, stained glass, and all that jazz. Access to a bar, but also sometimes, depending on the event you're in, the acoustics can be like. I personally, my little neurodivergent brain gets kind of quite annoyed by sounds sometimes. And playing in Warhammer World, I love going to Warhammer World because it's the home of Warhammer and it's a cool venue, but it's so noisy in there.
Yeah.
And with all the dice, obviously, ever since they removed the Realm of Battle boards and got mats, it's made it like a metric ton better. But I always finish Warhammer World events with a massive headache, and I find it quite intense, just all the noise constantly. Whereas this venue wasn't like that at all, and it was really cool. So
yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, you can commit war crimes on sacred ground, can't you? Because I think it was or is a church, isn't it? The chapel, isn't it?
It was a chapel, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, Pardo, take us through the mission, and maybe just your thoughts on the mission, and perhaps touch on the fact why you can only score from turn 2 and why you put that in place. And then myself and Dan can then just very briefly talk about the games that we had.
Yes, sure. So 5 objectives on the table, which is basically you actually told where to put them, which again speeds up the game and the deployment beforehand. And another good thing is that obviously you just need to move a few pieces of terrain and not a lot. Hammer and anvil deployment to change things up as well. We normally play a lot of Dawn of War, so we try to implement a couple of different deployments from the word go. Again, a point for every objective you hold at the start of each player's turn, starting on game 2. So this is, again, good to playtest as much as possible, because we noticed that if people had a lot of infiltrating stuff, you would score very heavily on the first 2 turns, just because you're scoring at the beginning of each player turn, meaning that if you go first and you have 3 infiltrating line units, like the likes of scouts or recon, you would score straight away 4 points. And again, we really pushed for no big scoring at the beginning of the game. We really wanted to implement that as much as possible. And again, down to playtesting, we noticed that it was having massive swings on the likes of Alpha Legion and Raven Guard, which automatically do it with certain units. And this is basically what we came up with. Quite an easy game to start off with. I know a lot of people would put kill points to start off the event. We switched it up. Didn't want kill points to start it all off. But obviously a very easy and streamlined mission to have.
Yeah, it's interesting, this one, because it's at the start. It is at the start, isn't it? This one, the start of each turn. It meant that you had to survive a round of shooting in order to collect that objective from the start. So I found that having heralds with units is always massively useful in that scenario, because unless that person has precision strike, there's not much. Precision shot. There's not much really they can do to get you off of that objective. So just a brief one from me. So I played Philip and his Imperial Fist. So I went in kind of going, oh, okay, I know this army well. Like Dan, he had a Kratos, but he had the all Volkite version of the Kratos. And we were playing on the board actually that you can see in the center, which is the Tiscan kind of Prosperine board. So there was loads of line of sight blocking. I think from what I remember, Philip had first turn, but I seized on him. And then from the first turn onwards, it was just a series of unfortunate events for Philip. So like sea beamers and were kind of like popping off everywhere. It caused the Kratos to go first turn. It blew up. It then kind of pinned multiple units in its explosion. I managed to get a Iliasta squad out of a tank. And then I seem to remember they got pinned, and it was quite unlucky for Philip. I think that first turn because I seized on him, and I think that from what I remember, he played relatively quite aggressively. He pushed up right up to the edge of that of the deployment zone, and he was just mega unlucky. It was Philip and his brother are two lovely guys, and I really hope they come back next year because they are great.
They were lovely.
They were really lovely. Philip's brother won
Players player,
didn't he? Yeah, they were just such great guys. The
from
life
Germany.
Life and soul of
Germans.
the party, really interesting. And I think I would say Philip, had technically the best painted army out of those 8 in terms of the technical skill that was behind that army. I would say that his was probably the best, and a really stunning army to look at. What I will do in the comments, I'll put all these people's that I know, links. All these people's links.
Yeah. He's actually coming to No Retreats in a few minutes time.
He did mention that actually. Yeah. He's a really, really, really nice guy. But basically, I think. He lost that game because I seized the initiative. I think that and because he lost quite critical units that were pinned quite early on, it was, I think, an uphill struggle for him from that point. And I think I won't dwell on it too much, but I managed to get the what like a mega victory. It's not called a mega victory, is it? What was it called? Major victory, not a mega victory.
I prefer mega victory though.
Now we're calling it mega victory.
Mega victory,
that's the thing now. That's the thing.
How about you, Dan? So your first game was against Word Bearers, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Right. Okay. Talk us through that one.
Again, and this is a consistent theme. A lovely opponent. Lewis. I think
Luis, yes, from Barcelona.
In Barcelona, yeah. His army was really cool. It was really like heavily converted. It was very gribbly, I would describe it. Lots of spikes and skulls and tentacles and stuff coming off it. Had a big unit of brutes, which was a pretty scary thing. I think if there's one thing, Rob's been talking about Volkite heavy support squads, and people might listen to this and think, oh, maybe I'll add those to my army as I'm considering. I think another kind of output of this event is the burgeoning brute meta, and I think having a high profile event like this where lots of brutes have been taken, I think it has highlighted to, certainly in our gaming group, the WhatsApp has been aflame with esoterists and things like that. And I think they're a very powerful thing. They break some of the rules of the game, I think, and I think that makes them they're powerful because of that. So you can effectively you summon them and they can move from where they're summoned rather than deep striking and then charging from there. So they don't have to charge from where they were summoned.
Crazy.
They can move.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Not only that, it's a safe summon. If you fail your psychic test, it's not that they don't come. It's just the like deep strike effectively scatters.
When Jackson told me that, I was like, "Come on, mate, you're pull the other one. Like that can't be right." Yeah. And I looked at the rules. It was like, "Oh, they just scatter 1d6." I was like, "What the hell is this?"
1d6, not even 2. And the thing is, they scatter safely as well. So on game 4, my opponent summoned one of his 2 units. 2 units, that's right. Right next to the edge of the board. And it flew off. And I was like, sweet, I can like disorder them or something like that now. And he's like, no, basically just they come, it bounces off
that's
the
so
table.
frustrating.
But so Lewis was lovely, cool army to face. Quite scary because it gets up in your grill quite quickly.
Yeah.
How did I win this game? If you won because you seized initiative, I won because of pinning. I basically was very, very meticulous. My advice in competitive gaming is you play the mission. Don't play the army, don't get distracted by the big scary tank or the Leviathan Dreadnought that you spend 3 turns killing. Just shoot the troops, just shoot the line. And so every single turn I would shoot enough of the line to either pin them or generate a panic test or something like that, and then I would then move on to the nasty units. And one of the things he said at the end of the game was, "You didn't shoot any of my units until you had effectively you'd won the game."
Yeah.
You know, he's like, "You didn't shoot my Galvor back until turn 3.
Yeah.
You didn't shoot this until then." And I think I just honed in on the line, because this was a difficult mission for me, because he had such a fast frontal assault army. And yes, Pardo, my infiltrators are very good against getting, you know, I could have put 3 units of 5 recon marines on those 3 objectives on turn 1, but they would have been dead by the end of turn 1. So there was no point in doing that. So I played it quite safe. And then going back into that meticulous thing, I kind of pulled, I kind of like apologized for this, but at the same time, we knew this was the rules of the game. You know, you don't go to a tournament and then get annoyed that someone's like,
play by
I don't
the
want to say
rules.
being gamey, but like playing by the rules. So I played range advantages and positioning advantages very, very aggressively on a thing. I was basically like, I can only kill the things that I can see and the things that I'm in range of. I have positioned this dreadnought, so the only things I can see in this unit are your warlord and your like the magician, whatever, the esoterist. So I shot out his warlord only through positioning.
I see,
by hiding the rest of the squad from it.
Of course.
And I said, "Oh, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm sorry, it's a bit gamey, but as far as I understand, that is the rule. That is the rules of shooting."
It's not even rules. It's like modern warfare, right? You would only be able to shoot where you hit. So
but true, but never apply the I suppose the rules of physics to a war game, right? Just look at some of the Space Marine flyers. So and when I said that, I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to do this." He was like, "Don't be silly. I would do the same. This is a tournament." And I think that kind of that sort of level of sportsmanship, which is like, we're both here to win. You're going to do all the things in your power to win, and I'm not going to hold it against you. That was, I think, consistent across all the things. I don't think I saw like any level of saltiness through my games against, like, you know, at things that I was doing when I was doing things like that, and vice versa. You know, you don't hold it against your opponent for trying to win a game when it's in a competitive environment.
That's a good point. And should I say actually something about the first 2 games, and something we mentioned was the Europeans were just so chill, weren't they? The guys from Europe were just so lovely and chill.
Lewis was like, "Oh, thanks for that. I really appreciate you beating me, because now I'm not going to win the event. And I don't have to try." And I was like, whereas I spent the whole weekend getting stressed, and like every single, and the pressure would go on. Every single game I'd win, I was like, "Oh no, I'm 2-0, 3-0, 4-0. Oh god, I can win it." It was just more stressful. And he was like, "No, I'm done. This is me."
It's interesting. And then it was just at the point where it's just like, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy these games. If I win them, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. So it was interesting. Cool. Okay, well, let's have a look at mission 2. So this is the kill point mission, is that right? So walk us through this one, Pardo, and walk us through this one.
So again, something completely different, change of deployment and kill points, which again, like Rob mentioned, is something that we're not seeing a lot in events, just because obviously it's just kill points. But we wanted diversity in every single mission. And again, I think that's kill points is something that's actually quite important, especially if you go with victory conditions like this. So Dawn of War, where we actually changed the deployment of this game from Hammer and Anvil to Dawn of War just weeks before. So mission 1 was actually Dawn of War. Mission 2 was actually Hammer and Anvil. But we saw that this mission played as Hammer and Anvil would actually create a very positive or very a big push for shooty armies, where they would just stay back. There's no objectives to move on to. There's no areas to move on to. So you can stay back and move tactically back every so often and just shoot things off the table. So we put Dawn of War so that things could reach to the opponent's army later on. And again, kill points, we didn't add something, a bit of a change, which was anything with toughness 6 or more, or 4 or more hull points would actually give you an extra victory points as well.
Awesome. Okay, so my game so Jackson actually gave me, he was playing Alpha Legion, he gave me the hardest, well, I mean, Dan gave me the hardest time in the final, but next to Dan was Jackson. So Jackson was running Headhunter Leviathan, and I knew all the tricks he would be kind of doing, or maybe he wasn't running Headhunter Leviathan, but he was running a lot of Headhunters, I mean, the the score was 20-10 to me in the end, so it wasn't a major victory, but he made me work for every single point, and it looked a bit hairy at the start of the first two turns for me. A good example was that his headhunters played very aggressive. He pushed them up right at the start of the game. He had first turn. I was able to kind of like string out my despoilers to hide my to hide my warlord, but I made the foolish decision of charging his headhunters because I needed to get rid of them, otherwise they were going to cause utter destruction. But in the charge, he overwatched with the headhunters and then killed my warlord straight away. And it was a bit of a struggle to get rid of those rhinos and those headhunters in that corner. I did manage it eventually, but it took me an awful long time to get them down. It was just a tough game. Like, he knows that list really, really well. He played really aggressively with it. He had some brutes in there which were a bit of a nightmare. And I was saved by the fact that you could intercept them in the shooting phase, which I didn't realize until like just before going to this event. But yeah, I managed to get the victory. But it was he made me work for it. Like, it was tough game. And this was an interesting deployment or terrain, because there were lots of pieces with very, very high sort of pieces, like almost like platforms. And there was no, like, we could deploy on those platforms. I mean, getting up and down them was a little bit tricky, because sometimes there was like 12 inches between, between levels. So that was a big discussion that we had. But it was a great game. He played it really aggressively, but I managed to snatch the victory. But it was a tough game. But he knows that list really, really well. But how about Javier? And so you were playing Alpha Legion on this one.
Yeah, so it was a triple Alpha Legion. You and me both facing up against Alpha Legion.
That's true.
So if you won for C's and I won through pinning, what did I win on this one? I think I won through smoke and mirrors.
Yeah,
I think I won through smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
There was a couple of short charges that he rolled poorly on, which made the difference. I think he didn't use his smoke and mirrors well, and we discussed at the end of the game. I didn't shoot his. He had a massive unit of Raven's Talons. What are they called?
The Dark Furies. You mean?
Dark Furies, that's it. Yeah. So Raven's Talons are the weapons they have, right?
Yeah,
I just call them Raven's Talons because the Dark Furies are merely a delivery mechanism.
Everybody calls them that. Everybody calls them Raven Talons, yeah.
So yeah, he used his smoke and mirrors to hop a depleted 5-man Terminator squad forward 6 inches, rather than he had some Raven's Talons in cover, and I thought genuinely, I didn't shoot them for the whole turn until he'd used up his reaction or both his reactions, whatever it was, because I was just like, well, as soon as I shoot that unit of Raven's Talons, they are going to teleport 12 inches up the board.
Yeah,
because that's what I would do, and it's not just 12 inches; it's 12 inches plus the deployment.
The D6. Yeah.
Well, no, not just the scatter, but the deployment from.
I see. Yeah, of course.
And so he didn't do that, and I think that led to the ultimate. Score going the way it did. Position. It's so important in this game. I got a few lucky things off. One of my javelins being on 2 wounds and things like that. Javier was in an Airbnb with Lewis. So, and this was Saturday morning, and so they had discussed
your list. Yeah.
And so when Lewis came over, and Javier was like at the end of the game. Or mid-game, I can't remember, but Javier was like, I've been doing it. I'm trying to kill the javelins. And obviously, because what happened is my javelins and my Kaisargans were so good they'd done so much damage in their first game, that I think he'd been given a duff steer, because Lewis had been like, oh yeah, those speeders, they're the ones to go for. So he really focused down my speeders. And, Kaisargans are 4 wounds? Something 7, and they can re-roll their shroud because they're land speeders, so they're actually quite resilient,
really resilient.
And so I think that was not bad advice, but I think that meant he was fixated on that rather than doing other things that he could have done.
Yeah,
which is fine. ultimately,
Isn't that the game? That's the game, right? That's
yeah,
the
that's
photo on screen now.
decisions and
Not
priority,
no,
right?
no. I mean the game. The photo on the display now
Oh yeah,
is
that's
actually
it.
the game we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
Javier and yourself.
That's
Yeah.
it. I don't know whether our little Zoom heads are hiding it, but this is really funny. Someone sent me this picture and went, "You're not going to get very many sports boats playing like that," because in this picture I'm like on my phone and I'm actually looking at his lists, and I've
Okay, okay.
which just goes
Nice,
to show
nice. Yeah,
BCP, right?
yeah,
And this was him deploying. So if anyone
yeah.
looks at this picture and thinks like, Dan's just so rude,
So
he's just like,
antisocial. Yeah, yeah,
texting on his
yeah.
phone. But my favorite moment in this in mission 2 was got nothing to do with my game. It was whilst Javier was deploying, I like walked over to Rob's table, and I was just about to be like, "Oh, how's it going?" And he'd already started his turn 1, and he just looked at me and just went, "Not now."
It's so,
And
honestly,
I looked at the
first
board,
turn,
and there was like 15 headhunters or
yeah,
15 whatever they were, like
yeah.
right up on your deployment, and I was
It
like,
was.
"I'm gonna leave you be. I'm gonna
It
leave you
was, it was, it was. That's what I mean. Like Jackson gave me a real like that. Those first 2 turns, I was just like, he's got me. Like he's killed the warlord already. Like he's two from there. He's just got 2 VPs already. Like, and that was just on an Overwatch. It wasn't even his turn that he had killed them. It was just literally on an Overwatch from one multi melter, and doubled him out. Like it was pretty rough. But yeah, the staying power of the Ultramarines managed to pull me through. So yeah. All right, let's go to mission 3. So this one was, I think, this was a sector control, wasn't it? And this is the one that me and Pardo played on the Bat Rep, and you can actually see this
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
right
That
now. It's the
report is
it's the Iron Warriors
it's out.
versus
Yeah.
the Ultramarines. Very, very, very popular battle report already. So talk us through this one. So this is zone control, but you could score an awful lot of victory points, couldn't you, in this
Yes.
mission?
So this was that's something that I haven't pointed out yet is that we wanted every mission to be different in the type of scoring it was. So the first 2 were more or less equal.
Yeah.
This one was one that you could score really, really high.
Yeah.
And again, 3 missions in a row, 3 missions with complete different standards of how to win the game. We've got objectives, we've got kill points, and then we've got area control. So basically that we wanted the first 3 games to be completely different. This one is actually very similar to Line Advance in one of the mission books, narrative mission books. It's called Line Advance, slightly changed in when you can score again. This is, you can't score to game 2, like I've already mentioned and briefed in mission 2. It is because of things that can infiltrate, things that can scout. In that specific mission itself, you score at the beginning of the game turn, meaning that if you have a lot of scouting units and a lot of infiltrating units, suddenly the game starts. Turn 1, your opponent is 7-0 up to you, and it's just an uphill struggle for yourself because he carries on scoring.
Yeah.
So again, and like you've already mentioned, it's any line unit that is in that deployment can score. So if you've got 5 line in that deployment at the end of the turn or at the beginning of the turn, I think it was, you score 5 points. It's not for if you score the zone. It's very high scoring, and we wanted specifically this game to be like that.
Yeah. This was really interesting, and so I played Tom with Imperial Fists again. Interesting one about Tom's list. So I had looked at it at lunchtime or whatever, and had been like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. He brought 3 predators, which was, I thought, an unusual choice with just the normal predator cannon. And I was like, that's an interesting choice. Like, that's not, I didn't think at the time it was the most optimized. He had got 3 dreadnoughts in a Talon. It was interesting. That again was interesting because I was like, it's unusual to see 3 dreads in a Talon when he's got 3 elite slots free. I would have thought that he would have just put, to have the flexibility. And I asked him about that because he deployed them all together. And I was like, can I ask why you did that? He was just like, I mucked up on Battlescribe and I'm committed to it now. And that's what I've done. So that's the way I'm doing it. I was like, fair play. Like, he was just like, because one of his dreads was like a double Gravis Lascannon dread. And I was like, surely you want that at the back of the board. He was like, that's what I've written on Battlescribe. I'm not used to using it. That's just what it is. So he was playing with the hand that he got dealt. He was a really great player. He really, really knew his stuff, and it was a real pleasure to play him. He got first turn, and he he was one of those people that knew what Volkites could do. So he kind of was just like, right, those things need to die. He didn't take a lot of searchlights. His Land Raider was the only thing with searchlights, but he did something really interesting, which was like, because it obviously had power of machine spirit, he could be like, right, I'm going to light that up, I'm going to light that up, and I hadn't seen that before until that tournament, that using a Land Raider to light up multiple different targets, which I thought was really, really interesting. That he
It's
had
4, isn't it? 4. Up to 4 units.
He had 2 heavy support squads. I think one was a las cannon squad, one was an auto cannon squad. I think he had a Punisher. I want to say he had a Punisher. Maybe I'm making that up. Maybe it was a Land Raider. And an awful lot of DACA coming from the Predators, and then a number of Templar Brethren squads. In fact, he took Templar Brethren Rite of War. I suppose one of the standout moments was that Land Raider quite early on got immobilized, so it meant that the Templar Brethren were walking up the board. Now, that didn't hamper them too much because they were able to kind of get into combat eventually, but it did slow down their march across the board because they were immobilized so early on. The other one was that I was able to blind the heavy support squads. I think the las cannon squad once, and I think I managed to pin the autocannon squad. If not, it was blinded, I think. So a couple of rolls went my way, a couple of blinding rolls went my way, and then it was just a matter of trying to kind of basically just destroy his scoring units as quickly as possible, especially in that middle ground, while trying to march ahead, trying to get into his deployment zone. Now, I did manage to get into his deployment zone with the Locutaris, but man alive, those Predators, I will never underestimate those again. Like, the fact that they're strength 8, and they go into a Locutaris squad, it's all fine up until the point that you roll a 1 and you're just like, that model has now gone, and I don't get a feel no pain on that because it's got,
and
because
they're auto weapons, so they're hitting on 2s, right? Because of Imperial Fists.
Exactly that. Like, I was
people miss about the strength 8, huh? People miss about the strength 8. Yeah,
so good. Like, against Terminators, you're gonna roll 1s. If you've got like 12 shots coming in, you're gonna roll a couple of 1s against them, and you're just like, that's just them obliterated. Like,
and las cannons on the side or heavy bolters?
I can't remember. I think it was las cannons on the side. So those themselves were just causing a pain. But
las cannons, and they have they had illustrious. No, they have heavy bolters. Heavy bolters on the top as well.
Like they were.
Right.
They were.
Nice.
They were loads of DACA coming out of them, but really impressed. And actually, like, I was just like, I'll just slap a pie plate down on them with a heavy conversion beamer, and I was never able to like blow up one straight away. Right, it took a lot of work to get through them, but not to be underestimated. But Tom. And somebody said this when they walked over, but Tom was like, yep, I know I've lost, or I think I'm going to lose, but I'm going to make you work for every single turn that you have. And he's that kind of like real Imperial Fist mindset, stalwart defender of the walls. He was going to make you work for the victory. But it was a great game, and he knew his rules back to front, like, really, really well. But you were playing Ricardo, Dan. Now, this is a list that neither of us wanted to face, because Ricardo's list was
on the horror list, the nightmare list.
Most optimized list I think I've ever seen. It's
goodness.
Nuts. Yeah.
And if you want to see this list in action, I don't know whether it's live yet, or maybe by the time...
It's live. Yeah, it was out
live today, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right.
Yesterday.
I saw the Instagram post, but I wasn't certain whether it was an advert or an announcement. So Ricardo took Thousand Suns, lovely bloke, from Italian, but living in Denmark. I want to say. So he'd flown over from Denmark. And his army's gorgeous. One of the ones that was nominated for Best Army as well. It was the Court of the Crimson King, where you can deep strike, I don't know, up to
6 units. Six units, yeah.
Now, this game, I went into it. So Rob and I had a discussion over lunch, and I was like, "Cool, this is, I'm Icarus flying too close to the sun. I'm now playing with the big boys. I have no way of winning this, because he will deep. Yeah, he will absolutely smash me.
Good player.
He failed his 3-up reserve roll for turn 2.
Wow.
Twice with the reroll. And that then suddenly put me in the game, and I was like, wait a minute, if I can just do this, this, and this. Turn 3, it arrives, and like my whole army just evaporates. And I'm just like, oh, for goodness sake. And I'd made a couple of poor decisions on positioning and target priority in turn 1 as well. So I think I'd also lost the first strike or whatever it's called. I can't remember, but basically it was rapidly going one way. And he then blew up my Kratos turn 4 and pinned himself in the explosion. And
classic.
I think one of I rolled amazingly with a bunch of armor saves and killed another unit. And it was really close because he hadn't arrived on turn 2. And I was like, if I can just, do X, and then I think I came and checked with you, Pardo. I was like, do fleeing and pinned units count towards how many units have you got at the end of the game? And the answer was no. And I kind of counted them up. I was like, if I can just pin one more unit and make one unit run away or something like that, I could win this.
Yeah.
And I think there were 4 things that couldn't have happened or something. Which, if any one of those 4, I think it even got to 5 by the end of it. One of those 4 to 5 things that, if it had happened the other way, any one of them, I would have lost.
Yeah.
And it was failing a rerollable deep strike, failing a 5-inch charge, getting pinned on a Master of Signals 10 leadership check by blowing up the Kratos, and then failing another pinning check somewhere else, and then he rolled. He rolled for the 5th turn, and it ended the game. So any one of those 5 things would have gone the other way. He would have won it. As it was, I won it. And this was one of the ones where I almost felt like I didn't deserve to win because I didn't outplay him. He was just kind of the dice didn't go his way.
Certain moments,
Being on the opposite side of this list, actually, like Dan's already stated, I had a game which is recorded out on YouTube now. I played Imperial Fists. The devastation that army gives you when it drops. So I can totally understand that having an extra turn of no devastation for you is pretty huge. I think
it lulls you to a full sense of security. You're like,
it's crazy. Like he's bringing like support squads in with like Melter, Plasma, and he's going for the correct units he wants to. He also brings something that was very cool. He also has a heavy weapons team dropping down, which are assault, so they can like drop down and stuff with heavy flamers. It's great. Something we want to point out, I think you've just mentioned it. Game lengths. All the newer missions are 4 turns. We actually had a 5th turn on a 5-up because, again, something that we play tested is that we also thought that having the what if there's a new next turn is always a good thing to have instead of like having, okay, turn 4, I know exactly what's happening for the player that's going second. It's always a bonus in the sense that you can kill what you need, move on to where you need, but there's always an element of surprise having a 5th turn on the roll of a 5-up.
Yes, that 5th turn will be important for a later conversation.
Hold that thought.
Conversation we shall have.
Okay.
So I mean, it was interesting about Ricardo's list as well, because I think that if you look at it on paper, not really knowing what the Thousand Suns rules are and the buffs that they can give to each unit, you probably look at it and be like, okay. But honestly, like the moment that thing is in action and it can do all the things it should do, you're like, this is probably one of the most optimized lists ever written.
Yeah, it's very clever. It's got like a really good, bold, strong backline shooting. It's got Vindicators, it's got Laser Destroyers, it's got Castroferum, Gravis, Las Cannons. It's got some speeders with Grav. And then suddenly, after all that shooting at you, suddenly turn to it goes, now I'm also in your lines, also having more Dakar against you. It's a very strong list. Yeah,
it's good. And lots of units you don't see. You don't necessarily see loads of Plasma support squads or heavy Flamer squads, but it works well. So that's a list that's been reviewed on Pardo's channel. So if you want to go listen to that list being reviewed, then you can go check out.
I think it speaks to the strength, as in the skills of Ricardo as a player.
Oh my god!
That he's doing so well with what I think is seen as an underpowered Legion, and he's using weird and wonderful units. So just imagine if he was taking like Stone Gauntlet or
exactly,
one of these like classic, very very good lists.
it's actually a bit sad that we don't see any of the specific Thousand Suns list in the Thousand Suns army. But he's making the most of everything else that the Rite of War brings and all the rest brings.
Yeah, 100%. It's very, very cool list. Okay, well, let's talk about mission 4. So this is
Sunday now.
Yeah, Sunday. So early morning Sunday, and of course we knew what the lists we were playing were on that Saturday night, didn't we? So
that's right.
It did allow you to go away and assess the list, find out what's what. Pardo, talk us through Shadows and Dust, mission 4.
So Shadows and Dust, again, we changed the deployment again, diversity, and obviously looking for the best commander. It's always a good thing to have different deployments. This is a mission that is an objective based, but again, different. Like every mission, we want it to be different. So this one's the one that you can only capture as from turn 2, and you can only remove an objective if you score it, depending on the turn it was. So turn 2, you could grab 1 objective. Turn 3, you could grab 2 objectives. Turn 4, you could grab 2 objectives if you were holding it with a line unit as per the normal rules. It's a great mission. Very tactical. Personally, I think that when I was playtesting and playing this mission, I think it was one of the missions we were playtesting the most. And it was so important to get the objectives right in which ones you scored first, especially on turn 2. I think that misjudging on a objective and removing the one that you should have removed earlier on was actually crucial in the game. Now, this is the mission that we really wanted to push for, a low-scoring mission, for there to be as many draws as possible. We actually did this right. I think there was 5 draws in the whole of the round, and basically this was so there was still a chance for people that had lost the game to still be in the top 3. So we wanted draws specifically so that there was still a good amount of people going into game 5 with a chance to podium, not win, because if you were on a loss already, it was actually quite difficult or near impossible for you to win. But there was a big chance of, if someone that was on 4 wins got a draw and you had 1 loss only, there was a better chance of you getting into the podium as a second or third. And it worked quite well. We actually had 5 draws, which was what we were playtesting and pushing for.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting mission that me and Dan played the previous few days ago, and I was really glad that we had played this game before, because it did exactly what you said, Pardo, which was knowing the order with which to take the objectives off. So I knew, as long as I could hold the back line, that back objective wasn't a priority for me to pick up in turn 2, because if I could just hold it and stay there with a tac squad or whatever, I could grab that back objective late game and it wouldn't require a lot of work to do.
Exactly.
So while I've got most of my army still on the board, I can go grab the ones in the middle. I think it was always going to be a forlorn hope for most players, with the exception of maybe for Ricardo, to get that very back objective, and I'd be surprised if anybody did manage to get that back objective. But really it came to those central 3. But what I would say is, and this is what the game with Dan taught me, is that you could afford to only pick up 2 objectives, but if you played the secondaries, you could still win. And I think that was really important here, which is that, often I find with secondaries, they are secondary in your head, and that they're in terms of priority, they are secondary. But because, as you said, that this is such a low scoring game, those secondary become so important, and it can be the difference between winning and losing or drawing.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold that thought.
Yeah, hold that thought.
Exactly. Like this mission from the 6 times I played it pre-event, it was always, before we went into secondaries, it was always a 3-2. At that point, or should be, like, majority of the time. So the secondaries this was the mission that the secondaries were the most important by far.
Yeah, 100%. So just a few things. So this one was really interesting because Ziki was taking names all throughout that event. Like, he had played the Raven Guard list with 10 destroyers, 10 deliverers in, and he had won against that list. And I was like, that Raven Guard list is fucking nuts. Like, it's so strong. And the Iron Hands list, this Brethren of Iron list, had won against it. So I knew that it was going to be a tough battle. looking through the list on the Saturday night, what became very apparent to me was that basically everything was pseudo, it's not T5, but pseudo T5 or above. So the normal guys obviously are -1 strength when you shoot at them, so it effectively makes them T5. But not in the case of like las cannons and things. I do understand that, but what it meant was things like the Thalax, of which he took 2 or 3 units of Thalax, were then pseudo T6, and so everything essentially in that list was pseudo T5 or above, and as a result, it was a very tough list. And I think that target priority was very, very important. This game and Dan's, I have the most to kind of say. So I went second. But was able to I was able to get the counter strike point with a heavy conversion beamer, which was massively valuable. But I really tried hard not to focus on, just as Dan did in I think his game against the Word Bearers. I tried really hard not to focus on the units that would suck up a lot of shooting. So not once in the first 3 turns did I shoot at the Thanatar that he had in the list. Not once at all did I shoot until much later in the game. Shoot at the Leviathan until much later. I can't remember if I even shot at it, but like I didn't shoot at the Morlocks either, because I knew that it would just be a waste of time. So I just tried to focus on the scoring units and get rid of those as quickly as possible. I held the back line, on that objective, and I picked up that objective late in the game. So the central objective was essentially his. Like, I could contest it, but I couldn't get it. The objective on the left-hand side, I made a beeline for that straight away, managed to pick up that one. And then the objective on the right-hand side was essentially contested from what I recall, was a contested all game. So we both got 2 VPs, and then one was contested. And as a result, it came down to the secondaries. Now, the 2 moments in this game that really were definitive, because really the Iron Hand should have won it. So the first one is that my Contemptor managed to hold and deny an objective in the center of the board. The Morlocks charged me, and then the Thalax charged me. So 3 Thalax or 2 Thalax with melter bombs whiffed, didn't do anything. The Morlocks completely whiffed, which allowed me to hold those 2 units up for an entire turn, which meant that I was able to deal with some of the scoring units around the objective. And then the most critical point, which was almost like the last roll of the dice of the game, was the 5-man strong Morlock squad had to go through some difficult terrain in order to get to my Warlord, and the Warlord maybe had 9 guys in it, like 9 TAC Marines, and it was a Herald, and I would have crumbled like an old lady's hip against the 5 Morlocks plus the whatever characters it had in it, and he failed. He needed a 7 and he rolled a 5, and that was determined what would happen. Because absolutely, he charged in with his Forge Lord, which I managed to kill the Thanatar because it was down to like 2 wounds, because it had kept on double tapping for the entire game. I didn't do any wounds to it until those 2 wounds, and I was like, I think I can do it now. Kill the Thanatar. And then his warlord then charged me. He was expecting that the Morlocks could get in and the warlord could get in. These were 2 separate units. Only the warlord managed to get in. We didn't declare any challenges, so his warlord killed some of my guys, and then I smashed his warlord to death with my Thunderhammer attacks. He had a 3-up invent. He rolled like a 2, right? And it doesn't matter if you're an Iron Hand in close combat. Strength 8 will just double you out, and that really determined the result of the game. And managed I think I managed to get I must have got a major victory on that one, but it was down to the secondaries. It was a really good game. Tough list. Very elite though, is what I would say. It was probably the smallest, with the exception of the Custodes armies. It was the smallest of the list, but it was so tough. But yeah, good opponent. And the one thing I will say is that Ziki, I think it was before or after, I can't remember, but he did say, I said to him, do you want me to go through my army list? And he was like, no, I don't think so. I was like, are you sure? He's like, no, I had a look at it last night. It doesn't, I think his words were something along the lines of, it didn't look like much, or it didn't look very strong, or something like that. Or
he actually told me after the game. He actually told me after the game, like, whoa, that army list looks much less powerful than what it actually does.
Yeah,
but
she
again,
is.
I think you commanded it very well. I think if you know what you're doing with it, it's very dangerous, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So Dan, you got drawn against another list that we kind of were like, oh, we don't want to play that one. You got some really tough draws, I felt, in this one. So Henry's White Scars, which had the 2 units of brutes, which was just like
Traitor
nuts,
White
right?
Scars, yeah.
Traitor White Scars.
So I think this was, for me, of the nightmare lists, the worst.
The worst, yeah.
Like I think Ricardo's is the better list of them all, but I think this is like the most, I suppose, like oppressive, or the one that, like, against Ricardo, I was like, yeah, that's it's a very, very strong list, but depending on the mission and yada yada. Whereas this, I was just like, nah. And Rob and I, was it, say again?
Henry was lovely. Loved the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And
such a nice
consistently,
guy.
Every single player at the event that I played was lovy.
Same.
The final opponent, a bit dodgy, but yeah, Henry was lovely. And I think if you're going to bring an absolute like face melting list, you need to be a nice person.
Yeah.
Don't do me the disservice of being an ass while smashing my face in. At least do it with a smile. And Henry, absolute gentleman. It's really funny going back to I think you said Tom's integrity about the Talon of Dreadnoughts, and basically saying like, I made a mistake and whatever. Henry came up to the event, to the table, and was like, cool. So I said, do you want me to run you through the list? He's like, no, I had a look at it last night, just to check, you've not got any searchlights, have you? And I said, no, there's one on the Kratos. And he was like, oh, okay, I must have missed it. Fine. Little sort of frown there. He's, oh, okay, I must have missed it. Never mind. And then he was like, also, what do venom spears do? And I was like, venom spears? He's like, yeah, you've got venom spears on your warlord. I was like, do I? No, I don't.
What do they do?
I was like, I don't know what they do. I've not used them in any of my games, and I didn't think I had them in the list. Maybe I had the spare points. And then we all deployed, and I said, oh, they do this, they do that. And then whilst he was deploying, I looked at my phone. I was like, oh no.
You came to me, didn't you?
And after I looked at my phone and confirmed that I hadn't got a searchlight on my Kratos, and I had for some reason spent 10 points on venom spheres for my Terminator Warlord rather than a little torch for my tank, I went up to Pardo and said, oh, listen, mate, I've made a mistake. I have been playing it I hadn't touched the venom spheres all event, and I had been playing with a torchlight, a searchlight that I hadn't paid for. I was like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to run with the list that I've been playing? Or should I run with what's on paper? And Pardo was like, run with what's on paper. That you've made a mistake.
It was honest mistake till now. Now we need to go with what's on paper.
And so I went up to Henry and was like, listen, mate, I've completely like mucked up. There's no searchlight. And he was like, don't be stupid, just run a searchlight. That's what the list you're meant to be running. Like, you said you haven't used your venom spheres, so it hasn't impacted your 3 games. Like, I'm happy. Don't tell Pardo. So this is the first Pardo's hearing about it. Like, don't tell Pardo. Just run with a searchlight.
Yeah, that's fine. If your opponent's fine.
That's very kind, but like, that's not. The TO's told me to, and he was just like, don't be silly. Like, we're all here to have fun, and like, this is the point, right? Even we're all 3-0 at this point. Basically. Yeah. Everyone is just super lovely, super chilled out. It's like, yeah, of course, take the thing that you're meant to have rather than the mistake, whatever. Which was nice. I should have lost this game.
You thought you had lost numerous times when I was asking.
I mean, I thought I'd lost when I got drawn into it, but I lost this game by positioning. Having gone on about how important positioning is, I deployed my fearless blob of tactical marines in the bottom right corner there to get the kind of left field, the left hand of the middle objectives, and I teleported. Alpha Legion reacted onto the middle objective with my recons, claimed that turn 1 or turn 2 rather, and then stupidly I just didn't on my turn 1. I didn't move my tac squad up to be within range because I was like, well, I'll claim this one on turn 2, and I'll move up. I don't need to claim it on turn 1 because I don't need to move because can't claim it on turn 2. But obviously he could turn it to take it on his turn 2, and he went first. So he then claimed one of my rear objectives, which is I should have lost that game because of that. So going back to what you were saying there, like, it's normally 3-2. It actually wasn't. It was 3-2, but one of the objectives was my home one.
That's funny.
So yeah, I made a silly mistake there.
Yeah.
really tough game. Brutes getting thrown in my face, white scars, lots of like line of sight blocking terrain, made it very difficult to get any secondaries. He failed a couple of crucial leadership checks on his Kaisargans, which took them out of the game for the majority of the game. And then in the end, it was turn 4, and I think we'd gone on to turn 5. That's right. I think we'd gone on to turn 5, and we'd kind of added it up. And his warlord was hidden around the back of a huge bit of line of sight blocking terrain. There's nothing I could do to see him. And we basically counted up all things, and he was like, yeah, if, I've got like 10 units, you've got 9 units. So we're currently evens. So I will win on the secondaries or something like that. And I was like, yeah, unless. And I said it as a joke. I was like, unless I shoot your warlords unit and do 25% casualties and you run off the board. And he was like, yeah, but he's leadership 10.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but it might still happen. He was just like, yeah, whatever. Nice one. I was just like, okay, let's give this a go. And so I shot that unit as like one of the only things I did on turn 5. And I said, yeah, so could just take a leadership check on that. And bear in mind, they're like, his warlord is board edge.
Yeah.
Like his warlord is.
If he fails, he's gone. Right.
Yeah. And he picks up the 2 dice, and I just went, double 6, please, Henry. And he rolled the dice, double 6. And his face, because he'd gone from like effectively minor victory in the semi-final to losing then 2 units. So not only did I get warlord, but I then got
more than him as well.
More units.
So it went from a minor loss to a draw to then a minor victory for me. So in one fell swoop, he went from winning to losing. And rolling a double 6 on a 10-inch leadership check is a painful thing to do, but especially in like the semi-final,
the last roll of the game,
last dice roll.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like we both. He sort of head up. He was just like, and credit to him. We shook on it and he walked away from the table.
Yeah.
And not in a strop or anything like that, but he was like, I think he was like, it'd gone from such a height of emotions. He was like, GG. And he was like, GG, I just need a break. And he just, I think he took himself away because he just obviously didn't want to he was obviously annoyed. And it's okay to be annoyed. But what I thought was very sporting was he kind of took himself off for a couple of minutes. After having shaken, we shook hands, and he then just immediately, there was no post-game debrief or anything like that. Normally you chat whilst you pack up. He was just he just took himself away and came back and then was completely lovely, completely smiles. But obviously it had annoyed him. But the way he conducted himself, I felt was again, very gentlemanly, very sporting. And I didn't feel like there was any anger or frustration pointed at me. It was just the situation.
Just the dice. Well, that's a common factor against playing you, Dan. The dice of betraying people.
Oh yeah, but it was a very, very good game. Again, shouldn't have won it. Somehow did.
Yeah. Brett Henry's bringing the brute meta, right? That's the thing. Okay. So we then had armies on parade, didn't we? In between at lunchtime, and this was player voted. So you guys had chosen, I want to say 8 armies, but I think it actually turned into 9, didn't it?
It was so tight that it was let's just put a 9th in.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it's just always worth doing that one.
It's easier. Yeah, it's easier. Yeah.
And there were 9 beautiful armies on the table, and you can see them on the table here. There was a QR code that you needed to scan, and then you inputted your vote. So the Blood Angels, Dan's army, it's Dan, isn't it? I was right. I've played Dan a couple of times before.
It definitely is Dan, because when they announced best army, they went, the award goes to Dan, different surname. And I was like, for a split second, I knew I hadn't won it because my army wasn't the best there. But for a split second, I was like, could it be?
Love that. And Dan's beautiful Blood Angel army, which really did pack a punch on the table, and he spent a long time painting them. They look absolutely brilliant. Won the award, which was really, really nice to see. And he won some a big old bowl as well. So that was the army voting, and it was interesting because not every army was laid out, so that then meant that you couldn't get photos of every army. But the ones that you could get photos of were of a very high quality, which was really, really nice to see. Any thoughts on that one, Pardo? emotions?
Yeah, it's great. So one of the things we don't put all the armies out on display is that we've seen in the past that a lot of people move terrain about, and then it's a massive problem to put things. We just don't see terrain moved, and we suddenly see that people have started playing games with like the terrain really badly placed, and we just think that it makes it a bit more awards looking to have like the top armies by themselves on display. I think it looked great. The standard was great, and it was pretty cool. And Dan Tunbridge and his Blood Angels won it. Yeah,
amazing,
really cool conversions. I think that the Thalax with
the wings,
Blood Angel, the wings, the Blood Angel wings, Sanguinary Guard wings were a very likable part of that army.
Yeah, very, very, very cool. Looking at Ricardo's army was massive, wasn't it? Like,
it was
look how many bodies it's got. Oh my god,
it was huge.
It was so funny because like halfway through, like towards the end of turn 2 against that game, I was like, I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Like, and there's a reason you're doing all right. It's because you've got 3K and he's got 1,500 points on the board. Of course you're winning.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right. Okay. And then we go into the last game. So there's not, in fact, 2 games to go through here. It's a single game because myself and Dan managed to play each other in the final. So Pardo, talk us through this one. So this is one that we know and love, isn't it? This is originally from, you've done 1 or 2 tweaks on this one, is that right?
1 or 2 tweaks. I think it's just a minor tweaks on this one. The game length is different. Obviously, we went for Dawn of War just to finish off on a nice deployment, and it's scoring for areas again. But obviously, there can be no line units if you do want to score. So you have to have line units. Your opponent doesn't have to have. So it's a mission I really like to play because it's not only about you placing your models and where to place them, but also most importantly, making sure target priority is correct in the sense that you need to take off your opponent's line at the same time. So a mission that I really like. And I think it was a good finish at the end. We did change heavy armor a bit. So heavy armor in the main rule book actually is any armor, anything with the vehicle keyword. We've changed it to 4 hull points because we thought that if armies like Solar Auxilia brought a lot of transports, or there was an army with a lot of rhinos, it was going to be very, very strong for it. So heavy armor should be the bigger tanks, and we went for 4 hull points or more. So the likes of Sicarians and or bigger, right?
Kratos, for example. Yes.
Yeah, Kratos, for example.
Yeah. So this one was interesting because, full disclosure, I mean, I got extremely salty with my dice. Never at Dan, but with my dice, man alive. Like, I would say I probably roll fairly hot with my dice, like probably better than average most of the time. My luck just completely deserted me, and I don't think I made a single save, like all game. Like,
the gods of statistics are here to claim their tithe from you, Rob. You just said you feel like you roll high. They're just collecting the tax now.
That is literally it, right? Like, I could not make a shrouded save, a cover save to like save my life, and it was a complete juxtaposition to Dan, and he was just rolling like 5s and 6s.
I think a great example of that would be, I'd say, Rob, that's 1 save on your your herald or something. 1 2-up save. And you'd roll a 1, and you'd be like, cool, that's 6 AP2 wounds against your contemptor, roll 6 dice, and I'd roll 5 5s. It was just that kind of thing.
It was literally that.
I remember passing by. I really don't like as a TO getting really involved on tables, so I just like sneakily move around and try and leave space whilst I watch. But I remember one of the times passing by, and you roll. I didn't even see what you rolled, and you just went like. And just put your elbow on the table and just like motionless for like 4 or 5 seconds while Bob just fiddled with his fingers at the other side of the table. It was
it was my dice really did abandon me, and I think that as a result it was a bit of an uphill struggle. But anyway, let's rewind it. So Dan had first turn, so another game where I was second, but I didn't think that was any bad thing because going in, I was kind of like, Dan's got a big army. He's going to have to probably deploy. Yeah, he's going to need to spread out, and I think by the fact that he's going first, I always thought he would probably spread out his force because he's going to want to try and counteract wherever I go. So, but going second is no bad thing, because it then meant I was able to load up on one flank, and that's exactly what I did. Because what I was basically hoping was that I would have enough line units to contest each of the sections, or at least one in each of the sections, to be able to hold it. And if I just loaded up on one side, that would help me. But what I did do was place a single Locutarus squad on the far side, opposite Dan's tactical squads, which he had kind of like loaded up on one side, just in case he wanted to dash across and I could kind of take out some tactical marines. I was confident that I was never going to be able to wipe a unit, but because he had the herald in there, but I was confident I was always going to be able to kill more in a unit than him. That would mean that I would always win a combat, but it just meant I would be able to hold one up at some point if he decided to sprint across the board. So what you've got is a situation where Dan's spread out. He's got his tactical marines all on one side, his kind of speeders in the middle, his contemptors on one side, and the Kratos on the furthest side as well. And then what you've got on my side is one Locutarus squad hidden behind a big piece of rubble, and then my entire army fitted on the other half of the board. And what I'm hoping is basically I just have to fight one half of Dan's army. Now that is easier said than done, because he's got speeders and they can move fast. And that is one of the things I would say, which is that if you've got your speeders in the center, they're always going to be able to help on either flank. And I think that was something that it wasn't like I was unprepared for, but I kind of, the best laid plans, they sort of fell apart. Dan had also been on the receiving end of the Ultramarines advanced reaction in our first rolls of the first game, in our practice game. And he had learnt that he can't give away counter attack or counter strike that way. So he was wise to my games and the advanced reaction as well. So he was never going to fall into that trap. He was never going to target something that could shoot back and then another unit was going to shoot back, right? So I didn't have that up my sleeve. He had learned from that. What it was basically me just getting pounded by multi-melter shots that I couldn't react to, lots of Daka, and really struggling to make any saves and to stay in the game. And all throughout those early turns, I was just like, I've lost this. It was just, for me, the writing was on the wall. And I was struggling to, I managed to kill some speeders, those Grav Proteus speeders. They went relatively early to heavy conversion beamers. I was able to whittle down the Kazagan speeders to one. I was able to maybe kill like one dread, but there was still two like lurking around to the end of the game. I wasn't able to, like, the Kratos eventually went, but it took an awful lot of hard work and a smoke and mirrors reaction to get it out of, like, there were lots of things where that just were just not going right, all combined with Dan very meticulous, which didn't allow me to return fire very often. What eventually, though, I was able to do is, being hammered by all these shots, is make it up the flank, make it up the board. And it got to the fourth turn, and we had worked out that if we stopped at the fourth turn, it would be a draw. And that's what I was looking for. Like, because I was like, I'd be happy with a draw here, because I feared that if I continued, that it would be a loss for me and a win for Dan. And I could not see any way. I could, you know what? It was one of those ones where I'd taken such a pummeling, I could not see past the fourth turn, that I was just begging for it to be over. And the way that the fourth turn, or the fifth turn worked, is that if you rolled a 5 up, it would continue to the fifth turn. And me and Dan had a conversation at that point, and I basically said to him, there's no way you're fucking rolling this dice, because you have been rolling 5s all game. I'm going to roll this dice because I've been rolling 1s and 2s all game. Rolled it. It was a 5 up. So it went to the fifth turn. And I was like, fuck, this is not good. And it allowed to, because Dan went first, Dan needed to kill a number of units, first of all, but really he was looking for units to force morale checks, to force them back. Number one for last man standing, because we were pretty close on those points, but also it would make units fall back and I wouldn't be able to contest the board. What I was essentially hoping for was that those units would pass their morale checks, bearing in mind that there was lots of tanks near my units that would blow up and cause pinning checks. So those were still kicking around. I was trying to use them as cover, but obviously they blow up and they can blow up in a big way, especially with melter contemptors bearing down on them. But what essentially happened was that they survived long enough, and one of them survived to be able to hot-foot it over to Dan's section of the board. Dan was unable to come to me because the Locutaris basically were hidden behind there, ready to kind of like jump out when it needed to. So that had to discourage Dan from moving kind of too far forward. He was hoping that he would claim his section and the middle, and I would claim my section in the middle. What the fifth turn just about allowed me to do was to not claim it, but to deny it, which meant that it was a major victory in the end. But I mean, I couldn't see so far past the fifth turn that Dan basically had to coach me through and kind of say, look, if you went there, you've won. We don't even need to carry on with the shooting phase now, because if you just left it there, we've won the game. But man alive, my dice were poor, and Dan put up with my saltiness never towards Dan, but towards my dice were just absolutely unreal. But yeah, it was a really interesting game. And I think it was probably on reflection I was probably right to deploy in that way, but I think that there were just a lot of melter shots coming in from those. I mean, it was interesting because you said right at the start the Kratos wasn't particularly optimized. It felt bloody optimized when attacked Marines were just being felled and forcing morale checks. Yeah,
when it rinsed through that Warlords unit.
Oh my god!
A unit of, I think by the time the 20-man Despoiler unit and the Herald got halfway up the board, there were 10 of them, and I think I just fired a Kratos and a Dreadnought at them.
And there's nothing you could do, because that was actually like I kind of had deployed on one side, but not really thinking about the fact that all the Dreadnoughts were on side and all the Kratos were on one side as well, and things like that. So it was a really, really tight.
Just Rob's obviously given a real detailed rundown of that, so I won't do a full thing on it. The one thing I will say is I think I could have played my tactical squads differently. The risk of doing that is they then get locked up with Locutaris, and but I think I possibly could have played more aggressively there. And I fired four multi-melter shots within armor bane range into a Rhino.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, they weren't in armor bane range. No, they weren't. To be fair, it was just strength 8. But 4 strength 8 melter shots into a Rhino, and did one glance.
And that was a definitive moment, wasn't it?
And that was I think that was because that would have then exploded. It would have exploded, taken out some tacks.
Yeah, potentially
pinned them. It would have probably killed enough tack, because I think I only need to kill one more tack to get them to potentially run away, and that was the unit that then ultimately won the game. So. Yeah. It was all in the dice, but it was a phenomenal way to end the
weekend,
to end the event. People say, when I go to an event, I don't like to play my club mates, but if you are going to play a club mate, it might as well be in the final, right?
It might as well be, absolutely, yeah. But it was interesting because we also worked out that if we had drawn on that fourth turn, you would have come second because of your best force sporting. So my victory actually managed to knock Dan down to third place. Sad times. Whereas I think if I had drawn, I would have still come first. I think
so. Yeah, that's right.
I think the way that it had worked.
One of the things we were saying mid-game is, as we were on turn 4 and we were working out the points, you were like, I think this is going to be a draw, and you I think we both said like, so it's going to be annoying if it's a draw, and like Ziggy, for example, maybe he got a major victory. Imagine if he then came first.
Yeah. We were cognizant of that, but I can't remember whether he did manage to get a major victory. But we were kind of like, somebody might come up from behind.
Ziggy played Ricardo at the end as well, so it was another good win for him at the very end. Yeah, he did play Ricardo in the end.
Yeah, nice one. Cool. Okay, well let's let's finish it off just by I think it's our closing thoughts.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll do our closing thoughts now. Here are all the people at the event, and then the top 8 as well. But yeah, I mean, I had a great time. Like, I had a brilliant time, and it was a different experience to No Retreat. And in many ways, I prefer games where there isn't stuff going on. Right? Maybe it's just the autism in me, but I like a game where it's just like, this is the mission and nothing unexpected is going to happen. That's just me. I understand that other people will be different. And the predictability of the games I preferred, except of course when your dice leave you. But I really liked it. It was chilled, but also I had a different experience than No Retreat, in the sense that we were able to explore much more of Gibraltar, eat in places that I hadn't eaten before, which was I thought was great. So 100% I'd recommend, and 100% I will be back again next year to try and defend my defend my title. But how about you, Dan? What's your kind of closing thoughts on it?
So yeah, absolutely, definitely coming next year if work and life allows. And the only thing I will say about your point there about scenarios is that if you changed what you were awarding people in this event, in this pack, and generated a scenario, this exact pack, you could literally airlift this pack and deep strike it into a narrative event. So instead of having first, second, third, you have judge voted painting, the person who has the most warlord kills or something like that, and I don't know, like a second most sporting prize. And then you're not rewarding individual performance, you're just rewarding things that go around in the game. And you could have a funny one of, like, maybe you could have like the person who kills the most tanks, you could have the person who kills the most characters, whatever it might be. But you could literally take this exact pack and run it in a narrative event with a with a lore generated wrap.
Definitely. You'll probably see similar to that at No Retreat, just adding obviously the big narrative we always add, and it's great. We've already had two events message us saying that they will be using the exact same pack at one of their events as well. So it's great for the community to be using it, as well as our house rules as well, which are like the Artificer Armor one is like global now. It's like everywhere. I even see like battle reports in different channels with different countries, and they are using it. So it's great to actually see it
happening.
That's
very good. And then
here's a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go. So I would say, Rob, if you could change one thing about the event, let's say next year is going to be exactly the same, and you could only change one thing, what would that one thing be? And if the whole event is going to be built from the ground up, what is the one thing that you would keep about the event?
Oh, right. So for me, I think the pack, the list restrictions actually worked quite well when the rubber met the road. I think that worked quite well. I think if I could change anything, although this is linked to list restrictions, I think that I think that militia and solar orcs needs very careful looking at when designing restrictive lists, and this is something I would say about my events as well as anything else, which is that the problem that you have with solar orcs, and people will know this because I've said it for a long time, is that sure, if you take like 3 Drakasans and a couple of Lehman Russes and just some dudes, and some units that aren't particularly well optimized, like, fair play, right? You should the rule of 3 should be excluded. However, when you're stacking up on vanquishers, laser rapier destroyers, basically all the good shit, the rule of 3 is there to stop spam. But the problem with solar orcs by nature is you kind of have to spam because of the nature of it, but they still can spam really good stuff. I mean, that's one of the issues, and that's the complexity I think with solar orcs, is that not only can they get up to stubborn 11 with the reborn cohorts, but they can also take very strong units. And I think it's a real dilemma with event organizers about what they do to deal with that. Do they restrict some units and other? Because then they'll be like, well, if you stop me from taking 18 laser rapiers, then I'm not going to be able to compete with everybody else within it, right? I
It's
do
difficult,
understand that. I understand the dilemma, but I mean, one of the lists literally was like 18 laser rapiers, right, or 12 laser rapiers or something, wasn't it? It was
I think it was, yeah. One, two, three, four, six,
pretty.
nine. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty strong, pretty fruity. I mean, that's just like a tank, a dread gone, you know, and each of those can fire at different things because of the way that the list is built. So I think that probably needs looking at, but I think that it would probably need some careful play testing to kind of go.
Yeah.
And then you have the problem of kind of going with a solar orcs player. Well, this is restricted, but this isn't restricted, and this is restricted, and then
Yeah,
you do want things to be simple. I understand it's a nightmare. Like, I do understand. But yeah, I think I would have been interested to see whether that guy, if he had come, what would have then happened.
So for example, we've already done some notes. It's always good to like at least write down some notes after an event now when it's fresh in you. So for example, we have already pointed out that we will limit the rapier destroyers to a certain amount, and we also limited the doctrine to leadership 10 maximum as well, because I think that 11 is where it gets like a bit too much. I think like a 10 is like a prayer to leadership. So we have already like counted in the sense that we won't restrict it to rule of 3, but we will have to restrict certain things like we have in certain legions, right? So exactly. They're just treated as a legion, and as a right of war, and just for example, out of my head, I can remember that those two were 2 points that we added.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's not, apart from that though, there's not much has changed. I you know, it worked really effectively and really well. Actually, I thought it was really good. So I'm really I mean, kind of changing solar rules is a nitpicking thing, isn't it? I mean, it's not a fundamental thing of the thing. How about you, Dan? What would you change?
So I think that the one thing I would change is I get what you said about generalship and stuff about terrain. However, I think if you have, maybe this is because I'm sat here looking at a bunch of tanks, you know, on the opposite wall. I think if I had brought an armored spearhead and say Rob and I had been drawn in the final, like on the Tiscombe board, it would have been a bit of a feel bad, especially like if you play game 1 and you lose game 1, you're like, oh well, that's annoying, I got bad matchup. But if you're then starting going into like the semi-final and the final, and you get a bad board, and you've got a list that effectively can't be played properly on that board, is that fair? Is that really a general?
We do have it in the rules pack. We warn people that our boards are going to be quite dense, like you see in battle reports. So I think it's at least it's a warning. Because I totally understand it. It's one of the things of why I don't allow super heavies. It's not more about the rules because I don't think they're good enough, but there's been so many other occasions where they bring a Baneblade or they bring something that's big, like a Macedon, and suddenly it's like TO or EO, I can't really fit this. Can I move terrain? And it's like a bad feeling, like you're not supposed to move terrain because your opponent doesn't want that. So it's mostly more to do with
it's a choice, isn't it? It's a stylistic choice. The boards all looked gorgeous. I think for me, if I were to change one thing, I think I would have those boards like that. I would just have like 10% less terrain or something, just so someone with an armor spearhead or something like that could have a decent game.
I mean, the recommendation for next year would be don't take an armor spearhead. Is honestly what I would say to people, which is just like
maybe that's the thing. It's just like you just go into it. You play the game with the rules that you've got, and if you don't like those rules, then don't come to the event. It's like when people, people used to whinge at Warhammer World events, where they'd be like, oh, I won 5 of my games and I came 10th because someone who won 3 of the games got 5 best sport results. It's like, that was in the pack, and
I got a lot of good feedback. Not good feedback. I think a lot of people actually enjoyed the sense of like there was a couple of people, especially people from UK, they were like, oh I've gone to a couple of events where there's like 5 pieces of terrain on the boards, and it's been like a horrible game because of that. Because it's obviously if you take shooting it, so people were happy with that there was a lot of terrain. Would I put a little bit less? I think I agree with Dan. I think like a 10% less on each table would be a better way. to speed up the game in the
Pardon,
sense
you know
that there will
what? I
be
don't think it's each table. I don't think it's each table.
it's just a couple, yeah.
It's just
Just
a couple where it was
Yeah,
so
yeah,
extreme.
agree. I 100% agree. As we go building up the events for it to be bigger, I've already I've posted about it. I've talked to Rob about it in our live stream. We want to upgrade every event by 20 players until we get to 100. Obviously, I like to do things slow. I always say the same. People ask me like, what do you recommend? I want to start an event. I always say start small, make sure that everything is working well, everything is running smoothly, and then slowly build up. And even us, which we've been doing events now for 11 years, it's still, I still do it. It's my first event, this type of event, start small, build it up after there. And I think that's something that we will see. I think as we progress, and maybe some tables will be less to use terrain onto others. But all in all, I think it was great. I think not only as a TO, but I think it went well.
And that's the one thing I would maintain. Actually, I think if you could hang on to one aspect of this event, it's the slickness of it and the professionalism.
So slick,
you know, whether it's everything, all the rounds started on time, the pairings were super easy to access, the bar was there, the toilets were clean, you had a professional photographer taking photos, who's look, the pictures that you've seen in this event are her photos, and like they're just stunning photos. She caught my good side, whatever. Like I think it's cool to see like photos of an event that are taken by a professional, because you then don't have like your potato pick gaming cam, like phone cam pictures of a bad board.
Rob's seen like clearly how we work. Like I always make sure that we have to be as professional as possible, even though I think the event was like as good as it was going to get, and even though I was a bit scared coming up to the event of what was going to happen, what was going to be the overall look and the feeling, but I always like to step it up. I think that every EOTO event organizer should be doing that. Deliberate after with your team and where you can work to build up to a better event. I think a lot of events stay stuck in the sense like, it's run smoothly, everybody's been happy, there's only been a couple of mistakes, we can carry on doing what we're doing now. But I think I think that you shouldn't be doing that. I think you should always be working to progress and to make it better, and there's always ways of doing that, and feedback's great. I love feedback.
Resting on your laurels is the point, I think, isn't it, that you're making? Yeah. Right. Well, we have been recording, I think, probably for about 3 hours. So let's finish off. It's been a long word. So just want to say thank you to our Heresy Hammer top tier Praetors. Thank you so much for supporting the show. We could not do it without our friends of the show, but particularly thank you to our top tier Praetors. If we can just go to the next slide, of which I think we've got around 160 top tier Praetors, so thank you ever so much. If you're also looking to get into even more Horus Heresy content, then you can go and visit SN Battle Reports. Now, there's two places that you guys could go and support them, which is on YouTube, which is you can get extra bat reps and tacticas via their YouTube channel, or you too can sign up to their Patreon, and through there you'll be able to get access through a WhatsApp community. But also they do a giveaway, a once a month giveaway. I've yet to win anything, but all these lucky people keep on winning things month on month. So so make sure you go support them, and with your support they can make more content. That's the bottom line. And just to finish out the show, just a thank you to Dan and a thank you to Pardo as well. We really appreciate your time.
No problem.
And you guys, if we just go to the last slide, please, Dan. You guys know all the things about the social media and whatnot, but all I say is if you've got any questions for Dan or Pardo, you can either write them in the comments down below, or you can send us an email via heresyhammer30k@gmail.com. If you've got any generic or general questions, then you can send those in there as well, and we will get back to you, and we will answer your emails on a community show as well. As ever, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment, and we shall see you on the next one. Thank you ever so much for your time, guys. Really, really appreciate it, and thank you to you guys at home for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye.